101. Prophecy Spinner's End. A rusty iron fence barely separated the murky river from a narrow cobbled alley. The river wound silently through the night. Its banks were overgrown with weeds and littered with refuse. An abandoned mill hunched on the shore like a forgotten bone. Aside from the soft lap of water against the bank, the place was oppressively quiet. With an almost inaudible pop, three hooded figures appeared by the riverbank. One led, two followed, and they moved quickly to the mouth of the alley. Ahead rose rows of crumbling brick houses, their windows like dead eyes in the dark. The air smelled of mildew and decay. Voldemort's eyebrows twitched faintly. He could not imagine that a Hogwarts professor, the current potions master, would live in such a filthy place, choked with muggle rubbish. Peter Pettigrew was already pushing open the rusty fence. Voldemort flicked his black robes and led Quirrell and Pettigrew swiftly down the alley. They turned into a still darker lane where almost every street lamp was broken. Pettigrew raised his wand at the right moment. A speck of lumos sprang to life and lit the path faintly. At last, they stopped at the end of a street called Spinner's End, before the last house. The dwelling was unremarkable. The only sign of life was a faint yellow glow in one window, nearly swallowed by the dark. Quirrell hurried ahead of Pettigrew and knocked quickly. A few seconds later, there was movement inside. The door opened a crack, and a pair of black eyes peered out from behind it. "Master?" Snape's voice was low. He opened the door wider, but the light within was stingy and failed to reveal Voldemort's form. Snape stepped aside to let the three in. Voldemort walked without ceremony to the center of the sitting room and sat on the only sofa. "Severus, it's been a long—" He paused, a mocking curl at his mouth. "Ah, I remember now. Since we parted at Angus, you never came to find me. I had to come to you." His crimson eyes swept the room. It was as dark as a closed cell. The walls were almost entirely lined with bookshelves crowded with old books of magic. A single ancient lamp hung from the ceiling, its candle flickering weakly and throwing an unstable halo of yellow. Within that circle of light there was only a sofa, a rocking chair, and a small table. The furnishings were Spartan to the point of poverty. Quirrell and Pettigrew did not sit. They stood respectfully by Snape. "Master, congratulations on your return," Snape began. "There is no credit for you in this, Severus," Voldemort cut him off, his voice threaded with cold displeasure. "You are powerful, yet I do hope you have not lost your usefulness. They are extremely alert now, and major changes have occurred internally," Snape said evenly, voice steady and flat. "Albus Dumbledore is about to assume the office of Chief Undersecretary of the Ministry of Magic." He left the sentence hanging. "Let me guess," Voldemort rasped harshly, laughing once. "Our dear Professor Dumbledore taking that position is probably specifically to deal with me, isn't it?" The laugh died. He fixed Snape with a hard stare. "I have a problem, Severus." Snape said nothing. He knew what the Dark Lord referred to and would not speak of it unless required. The small room seemed to shrink under an oppressive silence. Finally, Voldemort broke it, his tone unusually even. "About that prophecy, you brought it to me then. I want to hear it again." "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches," Snape intoned, low and precise, as if reciting an ancient elegy, "born to a family that has thrice defeated the Dark Lord. Born as the seventh month dies. The power to vanquish the Dark Lord," Voldemort repeated softly, tasting the words like poison. "Thrice defeated, end of July." The more he pondered, the clearer the name became in his mind. Roger Lewis. Immediately a sense of absurdity followed. That boy, supposedly Muggle-born, how could such a person possibly have the power to defeat him? Voldemort had never truly believed anyone could end him. If the prophecy must be fulfilled, he preferred the child to come from a pure blood line. "You also think it's that Roger Lewis?" Snape's eyes flickered in the candlelight. "But he hasn't defeated you 3 times. A low growl rolled in Voldemort's throat. The words were swallowed back. He would not admit he had truly been defeated by the boy, and yet fury flared. If not for Roger Lewis's repeated interference, he would have returned fully with the Philosopher's Stone long ago. He sprang up and began to pace, agitated, his features shadowed and revealed by the unsteady candlelight. Snape, sensing the rage, bowed his head and spoke more urgently, voice low. "Master, allow me to make amends. I know how to find him. Let me bring him before you." "No," Voldemort stopped short. I do not need him now. There is no reason to waste effort searching for him. You are far more valuable to me, Severus, but not for such trivialities. Master, I am willing to serve you in all things. Snape's head bowed lower, his voice almost muffled in his chest. If that boy is captured, all will witness your supreme power again. My power is known from Ireland to Constantinople, Voldemort cried, fanatic arrogance flaring in his tone. But first I must understand the entirety of that prophecy, every word. He had seen prophecy's fearful precision with his own eyes. Quirrell's theft of the Philosopher's Stone had been revealed to him clear and true. The prophecy about the Savior must be equally exact. Its full content was priceless. Only by uncovering the whole could he identify the so-called Savior and learn how to utterly destroy him. Voldemort turned on Snape, his crimson eyes like coals in the gloom. I want to know the second half of that prophecy. Every word. 102. The Diary of Avery, the Death Eater. The Diary of Avery the Death Eater. P.S. This man was a classmate of the Dark Lord. He witnessed almost the whole arc of the Dark Lord's rise, apex, setbacks, resurgence, and downfall, but in the original account, he was only a minor figure, appearing once or twice. Diary of Death Eater Everett, a personal account of the rise and fall of the Dark Lord, to be continued. I am a Death Eater. I have followed that Lord since our student days. I did not join him for wealth or rank. I followed because he was the most brilliant master of the dark arts I had ever seen, and because we shared the same convictions. Look at the wizarding world now. It has sunk into corruption. Mudbloods and half-bloods have poured in, defiling the sanctity of pureblood lines. The ministry has flung open its doors to those mongrels, taught them to use wands, even welcomed them into Hogwarts to learn the deep magic our ancestors guarded. Their influence grows daily, and they seize lands and resources that rightfully belong to pureblood families. The world has gone mad. Muggles strut over wizards again. My like-minded comrades and I agreed. This must be reversed. At school, I secretly studied the Unforgivable Curses, only to discover they were pitifully weak, at best making someone's nose bleed. Then I met him. He was brilliant, terrifying, and resolute. He said purebloods must rule again. We must restore our world. He demonstrated a mastery of the dark arts none of us had seen before, and to prove his determination, he executed several mudbloods and muggles on the spot. I knew immediately he was the leader we had been waiting for. I pledged myself to him. He taught me to project the dark mark into the sky, not only a sign for communication, but a link that let Death Eaters feel one another across thousands of miles. It suited us perfectly. I followed him into many battles after that. We purged mudbloods and recruited others like ourselves. As the Dark Lord's power swelled, I noticed my own abilities stagnating. Among the Death Eaters, I was near the bottom. He was disappointed in me, and I was ashamed. He called my skill a disgrace to purebloods, taught me the Fiendfire Curse himself, and ordered relentless practice. He left that day saying he meant to deal with a man called James Potter and wipe out his family. Late that night, the dark mark on my arm dimmed. Word came, the mission had failed. The Dark Lord had been killed by James Potter's 1-year-old son, Harry Potter. How could an infant kill him? Yet the dark mark's dying flare confirmed it. The Dark Lord had fallen. With his defeat, our movement collapsed. We scattered. Some were captured, others defected. My magic was weak enough that I avoided identification as a Death Eater, but life became harder. The Half-Blood faction seized power, taking our lands, our estates, our dragon farms. I realized then we still needed a Dark Lord. Rumors circulated that the Harry Potter story didn't add up. If Harry had truly slain the Dark Lord, perhaps fate had chosen him to take up that mantle. In 1992, a friend from Hogwarts sent me secret news. The Dark Lord wasn't dead, only grievously wounded, and had infiltrated Hogwarts to steal the Philosopher's Stone. That failed too, and the man who foiled him wasn't Potter at all, but a first-year named Roger Lewis. That summer, an old ministry acquaintance told an even stranger tale. The Dark Lord had tried to break into Nicholas Flamel's home to steal the stone. Joel Shafiq confided that the Dark Lord had nearly been resurrected, but Roger ruined the ritual at the last moment, even taking the full force of the Dark Lord's fiendfire. If such terrible magic could be shrugged off, what hope was there? The Dark Lord fled again. This was terrifying. A mere schoolboy had opposed him twice. Even in his youth, the Dark Lord could not have managed such feats. At best, he'd slaughter muggles. Mr. Quirrell later told us Roger excelled in soul magic and was utterly unafraid of the killing curse. To be immune to Expelliarmus or a blasting spell might be explainable. There are counters, but not fearing Avada Kedavra? Is he even human? He is darker than any dark wizard. After all, even the Dark Lord feared the killing curse. At the end of that year, the dark mark burned bright again. The Dark Lord was summoning us. I apparated to the meeting, heart racing. He had returned. His visage had reverted from the snake-like face he'd once worn. He could perform powerful magic without a wand, and he seemed more formidable than before. He greeted us with fury for those who had ignored him, and punished us. I received several Crucio strikes for my absence. I writhed on the floor and watched Roger Lewis suspended in the air in an immaculate cloak, looking almost boyish and not at all like the ferocious killer the Dark Lord portrayed. He seemed nervous, inexperienced beside the Dark Lord's old confidence. The Dark Lord declared he was on the road to godhood, infinite power and immortality. To prove it, he resolved to execute Roger before us. I confess I misjudged the boy. I watched Roger transform Sirius Black into a great dragon and ride it to meet the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord unleashed spell after spell, but none affected Roger. He didn't even attempt to use the killing curse, perhaps because it had no effect. Enraged, the Dark Lord resorted to multi-castrating. He felled the dragon with overwhelming force, yet Roger remained untouched. Then the Dark Lord threw every fiendfire he had to trap him. The awful thing is that Roger broke free and summoned a horror. I cannot recall its name. The work the Dark Lord has given me lately tires my memory. Whatever it was, that thing terrified the Dark Lord into a rout. He fled with us in a panic. I had never seen, nor even heard of, that magic. It seemed some kind of ancient demon-summoning art, something even the Dark Lord did not know. He later told us that if Dumbledore and the Ministry had not arrived then, he would have killed Roger, though his tone betrayed how unsettled he remained. We all began to suspect what he did. Roger might be the boy from the prophecy. If the trend continued, that boy would one day vanquish the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord could not allow fate to grin and win. He decided to break the prophecy first. This time, he learned from past mistakes. He recruited broadly, secluded wizards, other dark wizards, giants, werewolves, vampires, and he placed agents inside at the Ministry and Hogwarts. Snape was used as an inside man. He swore that if this assault succeeded, the idea of a fated child of prophecy would be proven false, and the Death Eaters would sweep across Britain in one stroke. 103. The Death Eaters' Big Operation. There was almost no floor space left in the headmaster's office. Piles of rare magical reagents teetered in disorganized stacks, and parchment drafts lay scattered across the carpet, covered in dense, complex runes. The air smelled of scorch and burnt experiment, evidence that things had exploded here more than once. Dumbledore stood behind his desk, eyes bloodshot, dark hollows under them. His usually immaculate silver beard was tumbled and neglected. For weeks, he had nearly shut himself away, obsessively working on what he called the perfect resurrection spell. But the chaos of the room made the answer plain. Progress had not been encouraging. At first, the professors mistook the repeated outbursts for Death Eater attacks and rushed to the office. After a while, they grew used to it. Now, even if the building shook with some world-shattering noise, the corridor outside stayed calm and no one came running. "Roger," Dumbledore said, voice heavy with fatigue and impatience, "I want to hear your thoughts on the perfect resurrection spell." Roger munched nonchalantly on a handful of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. He pinched one, popped it into his mouth, and smiled at the clearly fraying headmaster. He knew precisely why Dumbledore was here. Albus wanted to bring back his sister, Ariana. Even if restoring life completely was impossible, perhaps he only wished to see her again, to speak once more. But the reality was cruel. Dumbledore had failed utterly. You theorize using the intense longing and memories of the living as anchors to draw together the scattered will and soul fragments of the deceased. Dumbledore's tone was severe, almost accusing. I followed that line to the letter. I prepared every necessary condition, gathered the strongest anchors, concentrated a sufficient willpower, But why was there no result? Roger thought about how Dumbledore had absconded with his resurrection notes and data and felt the old spark of indignation. He stayed silent, contentedly popping another bean, this time sugary strawberry, and let his eyes narrow in pleasure. Dumbledore leaned forward, hands planted on the desk, barely containing himself. The theory is sound, yet the practice fails. You nearly succeeded the last time. Salazar Slytherin's afterimage was collecting all traces of himself in the world. You've seen this, haven't you? He shook his head. But that's not necessarily good. If I'm right, the last piece of the puzzle for his return is you. He will come for you sooner or later. Do you really want to continue this research? Of course he did. It was a long-term project. But why had a century-old legend, respected throughout the wizarding world, come to trick a little wizard and steal his work? Dumbledore had taken the materials and then gone silent for weeks, without a single private lesson or even a courtesy reply. Roger curled his lip and reached for another bean. Bad luck. It tasted like earwax, and his face twisted in disgust. Not interested, he said, deadpan. I don't have anyone I especially want to resurrect at the moment. Dumbledore's face darkened. What do you know? I know a few things, Roger said with a smile. Your history is hardly a secret. Perhaps, have you considered looking for an old friend? Gellert Grindelwald, for example? At the name, Dumbledore went black. Do not mention him. Roger suppressed a delighted grin, but kept his voice level. His memory would be a very powerful anchor. If anyone could strengthen the spell, it would be him. Maybe he's been waiting for you. No, Dumbledore broke. Months of exhaustion, frustration, and a deeper, older pain snapped free all at once. Magic flared uncontrolled, the office thrummed, and the portraits gasped. Out! Get out of my office now! Roger's grin vanished. Maybe we could still have tea? The spell depends on the subject's will. If someone doesn't want to come back, they could pull you to the other side instead. Hey, wait. I still have questions. We could talk about how to. Before he finished, Dumbledore seized him by the arm and practically threw him through the door, slamming it shut with a bang. Silence fell. Dumbledore sank back into his chair and rubbed his sore temples. He knew, in the marrow of himself, that Ariana might truly not wish to return. The emerald flames in the fireplace guttered and flared, and Cornelius Fudge's uneasy, anxious voice rose from the hearth. Albus, I've agreed to your request. We'll do as you said. Fudge sounded deeply reluctant, but urgency forced him on. Death Eater activity has been escalating. There have been attacks, even on Aurors. When can you formally take your post at the Ministry? This was not the first time Fudge had pushed, though Dumbledore had earlier refused for reasons Fudge called eccentric. In Fudge's view, Dumbledore was using the offer to force through a personnel shakeup packed with Order members, and even a werewolf, Remus Lupin. A werewolf in the Ministry? Unthinkable. Dumbledore, brilliant as he was, had never been cut out for politics. Yet the situation had turned desperate. I've already arranged a position for Mr. Lupin in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, Fudge said, his tone pleading for compromise. Bad news has come from the Auror Office, the Beast Division, the Being Division, and the Goblin Liaison Office. The Death Eaters are unusually active. You know who appears to be preparing a large-scale operation. Fudge's voice trembled with the stakes. He wanted Dumbledore to assume office immediately. For days now, Minister Fudge, Dumbledore replied, voice steady though grave, their activity is far worse. They are not merely recruiting werewolves, vampires, giants, and goblins. They are attempting to sway the more reclusive witches and wizards. Are they going to attack the Ministry directly? Fudge asked, panic rising. Voldemort mobilizing so many allies suggested no mere skirmish. The Ministry's last confrontation with Death Eaters had only succeeded because of superior numbers. The Auror force was fewer than 1,000 and thinly scattered across the Isles. The ready force at any moment might be no more than 1/3. If the Death Eaters could muster 200 or 300, the Ministry might be unable to hold. Precisely why, Dumbledore said, standing, calm and commanding, we must unite every force we can. I propose expanding Auror recruitment at once and attempting cooperation with moderate factions among werewolves, giants, and even goblins. That is why I insisted on recommending Remus Lupin. If we don't try to win them over, you know who will. When that time comes, they will be against us. Isn't that logic clear? And yet you have delayed until now. 104. Prepare news of the Death Eater's resurgence, pressed down on the entire wizarding world. It could not be hidden. The Daily Prophet and Witch Weekly ran warning articles one after another, and even the usually eccentric Quibbler joined the chorus. The Ministry of Magic issued a solemn safety manual for defense against Death Eaters, but everyone knew in their hearts that it was mostly for show. A quiet tension settled over Hogwarts. Starting this month, some students from well-connected, wealthy families were being taken home by anxious parents. The empty seats at the 4 house tables in the Great Hall showed the change more plainly than anything else. At one end of a cluttered long table, Roger hunched over a spread of parchment covered in complex runes and magical circuitry, sketching and revising. He was putting the finishing touches on a set of alchemical equipment. He had been impossibly busy lately, largely because of Cornelius Fudge's relentless life-or-death urgency. The minister was sending owls almost every other day, pestering him about the equipment, desperate for Roger's newly founded Lewis Alchemy Items Company to begin full-line production at once so the ministry could outfit every auror. Fudge, at least, was not stingy with galleons. In a few days' time, rare alchemical materials and tens of thousands of galleons in research funds arrived at Roger's door. Everything was aimed at getting a finished product as fast as possible. Roger and the Weasley twins had been working non-stop. The twins owned 30% of the company and handled R&D and production, and to meet the ministry's massive order, they had pulled several all-nighters testing batches of different counter-spell series protective gear, special magic rings, and prototype multicasting wands. Roger, taking their feedback, was feverishly modifying blueprints while personally producing the most precise core components, tasks that required a level of magical skill the twins did not yet possess. "Someone else died," Ron shouted, holding up the latest copy of the Daily Prophet. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. He said, "Else," because just last week the mother of Hufflepuff's Hannah Abbott had been attacked and killed, a loss that had already cast a shadow over the castle. Harry, who had just undergone the soul procedure, had received what felt like an enormous boost. Roger had solidified 3 spells into his soul. In theory, Harry could now cast Expelliarmus, Petrificus Totalis, and Stupefy simultaneously. He sat beside Roger, reporting on how he felt after the surgery. When Ron mentioned the news, Harry leaned over to look at the paper. "It's Bertha Jorkins," Ron said, voice trembling. "Who is she?" Harry asked. The name meant nothing to him. "An employee in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement," Hermione said, taking the paper and scanning the article. Her brow creased. "She went missing while traveling alone on holiday and she's dead." Her face went pale. "People outside are terrified. Parvati and Padma Patil's parents are coming to take them home tomorrow. Eloise Midgen has already formally withdrawn. Her father picked her up last week." "What?" Harry blurted. "But Hogwarts is supposed to be the safest place. Everyone knows Dumbledore is here, and Roger, who can defeat you-know-who." He glanced at Roger, who kept scribbling without looking up. Ron leaned closer, eyes flicking over the partly empty Great Hall. "Actually, the headmaster hasn't been around much lately." Harry and Hermione followed his gaze to the staff table. Dumbledore's high-backed chair stood empty. They realized they had not seen Professor Dumbledore in the Great Hall since February began. Hermione looked at Roger, expecting him to know more. Roger's social circle already reached far beyond ordinary students. High-ranking ministry officials, wealthy businessmen in Diagon Alley, senior reporters at the Prophet, and professors from famous continental schools. Last summer, a French owl had even delivered an academic exchange invitation from Beauxbatons to him. If anyone would have inside information, it would be Roger. "Do you know something?" Hermione asked quietly. Roger didn't look up from his parchment. "Yeah." His pen moved on. "The headmaster is serving as the deputy minister at the Ministry of Magic, so he has to spend a lot of time in London." Before leaving for London, Dumbledore had asked Roger to solidify spells into Harry's soul to boost his strength, and had also asked Roger to take on more responsibility at Hogwarts during this special period. As a Hogwarts student, Roger couldn't refuse outright. Dumbledore had added a tempting condition he knew Roger couldn't refuse. He could arrange for Roger to be placed in the Department of Mysteries. It was practically unheard of, a kind of appointment from Hogwarts into the Ministry. Roger had no interest in a dull desk job at the Ministry. He did not lack money, fame, or influence. What he truly coveted was the Department of Mysteries itself, the Ministry's most secretive core research unit, responsible for things like love, time, thought, death, and space, and the repository of forbidden knowledge and dangerous objects gathered over millennia. The time turner Hermione once used came from the Department of Mysteries. Prophecies recorded by Professor Trelawney were stored there. Its rooms read like titles from legend: the Brain Room, the Death Chamber, the Hall of Prophecy, the Chamber of Love, the Space Chamber, the Time Chamber. The staff were called Unspeakables, a near-hereditary, insular group obsessed with research who rarely involved themselves in day-to-day ministry politics. Over the centuries, they preserved ancient records and artifacts that drew Roger like a magnet. So Roger had accepted Dumbledore's request, in part out of genuine desire to guard Hogwarts while Dumbledore worked in London, and partly to ensure he didn't appear to be someone who chased the Ministry's galleons at the expense of Hogwarts and the Order. Dumbledore was, Roger thought, both cunning and sentimental in a way that made him hard to disappoint. Now that you know who had returned and things were growing dire, Roger stopped writing, set his pen down, and turned to Harry, Hermione, and Ron. His gaze was sharp and unusually sober. For the future of the wizarding world, we need to prepare, even if we're still students, he said. Tonight, convene everyone under the name Hogwarts Legacy, and tell any other students who want to join. I'm going to show everyone some real skills, how to deal with Death Eaters. He meant it, the Hogwarts Chamber of Secrets. Legend said it was where the founders had kept the basilisk, but even that couldn't convey its true scale, huge enough that classrooms from several houses could be held there at once. Roger liked to imagine it had been a private lecture hall for the founders, reserved for their favored students. For now, he had borrowed it. The chamber was crowded. With Harry leading, Hermione organizing, and Ron running errands, they'd dragged in nearly half the year, well over 20 people, though in a place this vast, they still filled only a small corner. Among them were Wayne, Hannah, Ernie, and Susan from Hufflepuff, Lavender, Neville, Dean, and Seamus from Gryffindor, of course George and Fred, even a few Ravenclaws like Michael. The core group still leaned Gryffindor. Everyone clustered around tables piled with unfamiliar alchemical devices, anti-curse gear, military-grade double-vision spectacles, and more. Roger, what are all these things? Wayne asked. He recognized the double-vision spectacles, but the rest were foreign. Looks like Halloween props, Ron muttered. He hadn't been part of their development, and his brothers had kept him in the dark. Oh, poor Ronnie, George began. Your eye for things is truly worrying, isn't it, George? Fred cut in. Honestly, I almost think the family intelligence skipped Ron when it was being handed out, and half of it leaked out the back door. The twins bounced their lines off each other, flawless in timing, and Ron blushed angrily as he slammed a hat and a pair of gloves on the table. When Roger explained the devices were real, powerful alchemical equipment, Ron's embarrassment evaporated into glee. He grabbed a set and shoved it on. Merlin, it comes with an upgraded shield charm? That is so cool, he crowed, the oversized clothes hanging comically from his still-growing frame. Roger, are these the real thing? You're a genius. With this, what Death Eater's gonna scare us? It seems our little brother isn't completely hopeless. At least he knows to cling to Roger's thigh for freebies. Well put, Fred. Shame his flattery's not louder. His odd thing called self-esteem keeps him from kissing up properly. Their teasing burned Ron's cheeks again, but attention shifted as several large boxes in the center of the room were opened. Inside were objects shaped like wands, but much thicker and longer than ordinary ones. So big, many of the younger students had to hold them with both hands, more like short staves. The tips split into 3 to 5 prongs, and a cold metallic sheen showed beneath the wood. What is this? Hermione asked, brow furrowed. Even she looked puzzled. This is the pride of Lewis Alchemical Equipment Company, Roger said with a small smile. He didn't say more, but conjured a few practice targets a little distance away. He raised one of the staves, and light exploded from the tips. Different colored spells shot out at once, tearing the targets apart. 4 distinct spells fired together, each materializing in its own color and striking true. The crowd went quiet in dumbfounded awe. "This is a multicasting wand," Roger said slowly. "If your magic can support it, you can release multiple spells at once. In this prototype, it can fire up to 5 spells simultaneously." "Merlin," the students echoed. They surged forward, hands hovering over the strange wands, but reluctant to try one. Then Hannah Abbott stepped forward. She moved quietly, hefted a staff almost up to her shoulder, and concentrated as Roger had shown them. Swoosh! 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 All 5 prongs lit together, and 5 spells shrieked out, shredding the distant targets into pieces. Roger stared. Hannah's power was far greater than he remembered from last year's exams. The loss of her mother had hardened her. Grief had made her stronger. Hannah's success loosened the group. Everyone wanted a turn. "For safety," Roger called, raising his voice. "Everyone must wear their anti-curse gear before trying one out. Tonight we're getting familiar with the 5 spells locked into these wands: Expelliarmus, Petrificus Totalis, Stupefy, the Blasting Curse, and the Shattering Curse." After that, the chamber turned into organized chaos. One group practiced relentlessly with the wands, while another group worked to patch and mend the ruined targets with repairing charms. The crack of spells and the thud of repairs went on late into the night. Roger was surprised at how quickly the students picked up the solidified spells using the staves. The members of the Hogwarts Legacy group didn't improve much. Most of them already knew those spells, but many of the others became competent with all 5 after a single evening. When the crowd thinned, Hannah lingered at the edge, her face solemner than the rest. Roger started to step over, but she spoke first. "Roger," she said, voice small, "everybody keeps saying you're the savior. You're going to be able to beat you-know-who, right?" Roger froze at the mix of helplessness and hope in her eyes. He thought of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the way the choice of a savior had been decided by Voldemort himself. In the original timeline, Voldemort had marked Harry. Lily's sacrifice had made a boy he could not kill, and from then on, Harry wore the mantle of savior, the one who could restrain Voldemort. But Roger had changed things. From what he'd seen at the Battle of Angus, Voldemort's attention had shifted away from Harry. He'd even sent someone to kidnap Roger for a resurrection ritual, and the first person Voldemort tried to execute after returning had been Roger himself. Whether any of that satisfied the criteria of divination was unclear. He couldn't give Hannah a flippant answer. She had just lost her mother. Her question deserved care. After a quiet beat, he met her eyes. "No one is born a savior," he said. "If I have to put it another way, I don't think the role is fixed. Any one of us can be a savior. Every one of us has the power to stand against Lord Voldemort." "Everyone is a savior?" Hannah repeated, hope flickering her gaze. "Yes," Roger said, nodding firmly. "Every one of us." 106. Wizard Army. Meanwhile, at a certain manor in Aberdeenshire, a property owned by Lucius Malfoy, the house had been requisitioned outright by Lord Voldemort because of its closeness to Hogwarts. The place thrummed with all manner of figures. Look closely, and many of them could hardly be called human. In the shadows, a cluster of pale faces hunched, eyes sunken and rimmed with dark circles, looking gaunt and exhausted. At the corners of their mouths, the occasional flash of fangs gave them away as vampires, and the wizards nearby instinctively kept their distance. On the other side of the hall, a group of burly men in rough, threadbare clothes had gathered. Their leader's sharp teeth marked him as something other than human as well, earning them the scorn and exclusion of the core Death Eaters. Lord Voldemort stood in a room on the 2nd floor. The fire in the hearth had only just died. The embers were still warm, a sign that a secret communication had finished only moments before. "Master, can we truly trust Severus?" Imperius Curse, who had been instrumental in Voldemort's return and had secured his place at the Dark Lord's side, seized the moment to plant doubt. "I do not question your wisdom, only I saw him at Hogwarts bowing and fawning before Dumbledore. Now he swears loyalty to you. I find it hard to believe." Voldemort turned slowly. He stepped out on the balcony and looked down at the motley recruits gathered below. He was in a good mood. Things were proceeding well. Over 100 dark wizards had already come to him, and several reclusive wizarding families had been persuaded to join. Peter Pettigrew's efforts had borne fruit too. Dozens of vampires and werewolves, convinced by the rule of strength, had pledged themselves. With the original pureblood Death Eaters added in, Voldemort's force numbered over 200, enough to crush every power in the British wizarding world except the Ministry. Ordinarily, he might have waited, gathered even more strength until he had an overwhelming advantage over both the Ministry and the Order of the Phoenix. But his aim had never really been the Ministry. "Do you truly think our target is the Ministry of Magic?" His voice hissed like a snake. Quirrell was stunned into silence. Everything they had been doing, the secret meetings, Snape's covert talks, Pettigrew's missions to kidnap and interrogate Ministry employees, even the plot to use the Umbridge piece to tamper with the Ministry's flu network and portkeys, hadn't all been to launch this army straight into the Ministry? Hadn't Snape, as their mole, fed false intelligence to Dumbledore to draw the main force of the Order to defend the Ministry? And now Voldemort said they were not attacking the Ministry? Why the deception? The Ministry, Voldemort went on, contempt dripping from his words, is merely a bloated, corrupt bureaucracy, rotting from within. Dumbledore is old as well. I know he relies on the Elder Wand to stand against me. He paused, crimson pupils fixed on the distant silhouette of Hogwarts through the stained glass, hunger burning in his voice. What we must do is destroy their future and their hope. I want the world to see that before me there is no child of prophecy. I am everyone's destiny. Late that night, Hogwarts was quiet, the perfect hour for a night foray. Lately, there had been training sessions almost every evening. In groups of 20 or more, students slipped out from the Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff common rooms, moved silently to the second-floor girls' bathroom, and descended into the Chamber of Secrets. Tonight, they had gathered there again. Roger surveyed this small army of younger wizards with satisfaction. The alchemical gear he had designed had proven its worth. At the very least, it was simple enough for the students to use. After nearly 10 days of nightly drills, everyone had become proficient, and the results were startling. Over 20 students, each equipped with a multicasting wand. The best could trigger 5 different spells at once, most could hold 2 or 3, and even that made the web of fire from 20-plus multicasting wands terrifying. Roger privately estimated that even a wizard in a full set of anti-spell gear would struggle to withstand such concentrated assault. It was an intensity of attack that even Joel, after being personally empowered by Lord Voldemort, had trouble matching. Whether it equaled Voldemort himself, Roger could not say. He neither had the courage nor the opportunity to go toe-to-toe with the Dark Lord. But if there was a gap, it could be small. He marveled that Voldemort's personal willpower could be comparable to the combined will of more than 20 people. Was that his original strength, or the enhancement those dozen secluded wizards gave him during his resurrection? He wondered. If one could channel the will of thousands, how terrifying would the magic be? Roger had already begun to pursue that very principle. Not by the forced, dark methods Voldemort used, but through his improved military edition double vision spectacles, which linked multiple wills together safely and with consent. The participants all agreed. With practice, a squad's wills could be connected, focusing their collective resolve on a single person who would then cast with multiplied power. In tests, Roger grouped people so only one held a multi-casting wand as the output. The amplification was astonishing. Simple calculations showed the effect grew rapidly as the number of connected people increased. To find the limit, Roger kept adding people. When the number exceeded 10, however, the spectacles could not cope. He volunteered himself as the carrier for the experiment, and once they went past 10, the lenses cracked and burst into flames. The materials and workmanship on this batch of military edition double vision spectacles simply could not sustain a greater load. Still, the experiment proved the idea. Willpower linkage worked. It only needed a more robust alchemical medium. Roger was certain the Ministry would soon appreciate the value of such a device. Perhaps enough to control its distribution. 107. Ministry of Magic Procurement. By April, Death Eater activity had escalated into a near-daily headline. Reports of ministry employees being attacked filled the front pages, especially around London and its environs. It made sense. The ministry's headquarters were there, and Diagon Alley concentrated the largest number of wizards and witches. The ministry was stretched thin. The steady stream of violent incidents had sown real panic. Many officials and employees refused to go out on missions. Once a small squad was isolated, the odds of never coming back seemed all too real. Into that climate of fear strode Lewis Alchemy Products, very publicly announcing a donation of alchemical equipment to bolster the safety and effectiveness of ministry law enforcement teams. It was, of course, a show. Minister Fudge's allies carefully choreographed PR. Roger Lewis had not actually given away vast supplies. What was being touted as a donation was merely the formal handover of a set of contract samples under the company's name, dressed up for publicity. Minister Fudge's office buzzed with the kind of satisfaction only politicians feel when a prop falls into place. The prototype equipment Roger Lewis had promised had arrived, and it looked impressive. Willie Wagstaff, the manager Roger had put in charge of day-to-day operations, was in full flow, expounding on the wares to Fudge and a ring of senior officials. "Honorable Minister, gentlemen," Willie began, brimming with practiced enthusiasm, "our founder, Mr. Lewis, is indisputably eminent in magical research, youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin in history, a pioneer of polymorphic transformation and creature transfiguration, and a man whose breakthroughs in alchemy are nothing short of epoch-making. I dare say the Wisengamot will soon be discussing a second medal." "Enough, Mr. Wagstaff." Dumbledore cut in before Willie could escalate any further. "Could we focus on the actual products, please?" Willie took the interruption in his stride, giving the headmaster a theatrical bow. He resumed, this time listing the items with the slick confidence of a man who could sell sand in the desert. The anti-curse set, military edition double vision spectacles, special magic ring, multi-casting wand, portable swamp, and invisibility smoke bomb. Dumbledore listened impassively, but his eyebrows lifted when Willie mentioned the will-linking function of the military edition spectacles. Fudge, by contrast, found himself warming to the presentation. Willie had positioned the line as the result of Lewis Company's deep scenario analysis, a direct response to the ministry's most pressing pain points. Barty Crouch Sr. shifted in his seat, watching the demonstration with a critic's eye. He knew Willie well, not from high society, but from Diagon Alley. Willie had worked his way up from being, by Crouch's estimation, a street vendor, shrewd, adaptable, and overwhelmingly practiced in the art of selling questionable goods. The Counterfeit Defensive Measures Detection and Confiscation Office and the Department of Magical Equipment Control had never been able to pin anything solid on him. His eloquence had clearly persuaded Roger Lewis. Crouch did not take that as a comforting sign. When Willie demonstrated the multicasting wand, Crouch spoke up. "I don't have many objections to the rest," he said, "but Aurors usually need a single precise spell to finish a job. Why give them a heavy, conspicuous, overfunctional wand that sacrifices concealment and portability? It's impractical." He paused, then delivered the point that pushed most buttons. "And it costs 2,000 galleons. The whole kit is 4,000 galleons. Half the price is that wand. We could omit it entirely. The other items alone would greatly improve Auror's combat effectiveness and survivability." Amelia Bones, senior undersecretary in charge of finance, nodded. "Minister, without the multicasting wand, our current budget could re-equip every Auror. With it, we face a large deficit. We'd be talking loans from Gringotts." Fudge went pale at the thought. Let the goblins absorb the debt? Who could guarantee Gringotts would stay neutral? Rumors suggested goblins were being quietly courted by Voldemort's circle. If Gringotts bent toward the Dark Lord, the financial consequences would be catastrophic. Fudge glanced at Rufus Scrimger. "Rufus, your view?" Scrimger felt the tug of competing loyalties. Crouch's assessment was sound and professional. He didn't want to offend the longtime head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. At the same time, he knew Dumbledore backed Lewis Alchemy, and Lewis was politically useful to Fudge. Scrimger chose a middle path worthy of a career bureaucrat. He acknowledged Crouch's technical objections to the wand, then suggested broadening the issuance of the anti-curse set. Make it standard issue for all ministry employees who worked outside the building, not just Aurors. That way, he argued, the ministry could justify the contract's overall size while claiming to protect more personnel. Fudge loved the solution. He had already been thinking of getting a set for himself. Now it could be charged to public funds. With a satisfied flourish, he signed the supply contract with Willie Wagstaff. What if the money runs short? Someone asked. Prioritize the frontline Aurors and senior officials, Fudge declared. Everyone else can queue for allocation. 108. Rolling Black Tide. The Hufflepuff common room was almost dark. The fire had burned down to a few dull red embers. Roger rubbed his forehead, feeling increasingly exasperated. Wizards really did think differently. They actually believed the multicasting wand was useless, and their reasons were stranger still. Even more absurd to him was that only Harry and Hermione seemed to grasp his point, while pure-blood traditionalists like Ron sided with the ministry's conservative view. The truth finally dawned on him after a long think. The wizarding world was simply too small. In all of magical history, they had never fought battles on the scale of thousands, at most a few hundred. Most wizards had never conceived the idea of firepower coverage, much less imagined the horror of a dense magical barrage. Combined with the extraordinary power of individual wizards, most people assumed that the right spell or the right duelist could solve any problem. That individualistic mindset left them blind to organized tactics. They charged in swarms and fled in swarms, with almost no coordinated discipline. In their minds, a single great wizard could take on 100, so an army was often only dozens or 100 strong. The pricing strategy was completely wrong. Roger slapped his forehead. He'd been led astray by his own assumptions, expecting the high-value multicasting wand to bring in huge profits. He had lowered the prices on everything else to attract buyers, while neglecting the high-margin product. The cheaper items sold reasonably well, and total revenue looked similar, but profit had been almost halved. He was still cursing his lost margin when the ministry alarm went off. Death Eaters had infiltrated. The Aurors on patrol had detected the intruders and repelled them. One Death Eater had even been captured alive. Dumbledore, at the ministry in his capacity as chief warlock, immediately reported the incident. Cornelius Fudge was hauled out of bed in the middle of the night, protesting helplessly. He did not want to go, especially since he feared he might face he who must not be named and his followers at the ministry that very night. He would much rather have delayed until morning. But his assistant produced an already prepared invigoration draught, leaving him no escape. Under guard of several Aurors, he was ushered to the ministry. Fudge had seen Voldemort and Dumbledore fight to a standstill at the great battle at Angus, and he had witnessed the terrifying might of Voldemort's inner circle. The thought of facing that again filled him with dread. At the ministry headquarters, he took refuge in Dumbledore's office, clinging to the one wizard he trusted for a scrap of courage, and ordered an emergency recall of Aurors from across Britain. Only then did he feel a little relief. While the ministry readied itself, something else was moving toward Hogwarts, an undercurrent of black rolling along the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Heavy, unnatural clouds hung over it even though it was the dead of night. If Roger had been there, he would have recognized it immediately. An army of Dementors. They were so many, they didn't need to spread their despairing cloak. Sheer numbers swallowed the light. The creatures of the forest were the first to stir. Birds exploded from nests, beasts fled in panic. Hagrid, seeing shadows racing between the trees, tore toward the castle to sound the alarm. Lights flicked on throughout Hogwarts as Hagrid burst in, and from outside it looked like a sleeping giant waking. "All students, out of bed! Assemble in the corridors!" Filch's wheezy voice rasped through the dormitories. He limped along, waving a flashing wand the Weasley twins had made. Professor McGonagall tried to reach Dumbledore through the Flu network in her office, but the fireplace was dead. After trying several fireplaces, she realized with a blanch that Hogwarts' Flu network had been completely blocked. She then checked the double vision spectacles. Roger had once helped the ministry build a communication network using those, and found she could not contact the outside world either. That should have been impossible. "What?" Professor Trelawney shrieked. A great host is attacking Hogwarts? All channels closed? Merlin, I should have known. I spilled my tea during divination this morning and saw a vast black shadow. I should have stopped the lesson and left, she wailed, distraught. Sybil, there is no time for this, McGonagall snapped. She had no patience for the rambling seer and instead bellowed for all staff to assemble at the castle's main entrance. Students were roused and hustled into cloaks. Terror and confusion sat on their faces as professors and prefects shepherded them into the great hall and the central courtyard. From the windows, Roger could see the same rolling black clouds and knew at once they were Dementors, Voldemort's doing. The foul creatures had long since joined him. But why Hogwarts? Roger's stomach turned. Voldemort had been focusing on the Ministry. Was he now aiming at Hogwarts? Could Voldemort be after him, marking Roger as the child of prophecy? The thought soured his mood. He wasn't afraid of Voldemort personally, but he lacked the strength to defeat the Dark Lord outright. Nobody wanted that kind of attention. He hurried through the corridors toward the Chamber of Secrets to retrieve the batch of alchemical equipment he had stored there. On the way, he met the Weasley twins. At the chamber entrance, Hannah, Hermione, Ginny, Ron, Wayne, and others were already gathered. Hannah, Hermione, Ginny, Roger said, swinging the chamber door open and speaking with the authority of someone used to giving orders. You're too young. Tonight is too dangerous. You must stay behind. This isn't a fight you should be in. That's not fair, Hermione snapped. That's sexism. Harry and the others can fight. Why can't we? Harry had the protection of a love charm, and more recently Roger's solidified spells, which had dramatically boosted his combat ability. He was not in the same position as the girls. Hannah tossed her hair defiantly and charged into the chamber. I'm going with you. You're not that old, Ginny protested, fiery despite being the youngest. Ron, finally sensible for once, backed Roger up. He's right, Ginny. You're in your first year. You're too small. It's smarter to withdraw now. Even the twins, uncharacteristically, nodded in agreement. Ginny looked at Roger with pleading eyes, but he shook his head. She stamped her foot in anger and turned away. They said no more. The group drew their wands and quickly moved the alchemical equipment from the chamber to the Great Hall under the patrol of older students and staff. At the castle's main entrance, McGonagall had gathered the staff. After confirming that the students were safely assembled, she drew a steady breath and addressed the ancient stones with a clear, resolute voice. Pier totem locomotor. The dark mass of the Death Eater army surged forward like a tide and ground to a halt at the mouth of the viaduct. More than 300 figures blocked the bridgehead completely. Not only sinister wizards, but the shadowed shapes of vampires and werewolves. Behind them, the sky had been swallowed by rolling black smoke. Countless Dementors hung there like clouds of death, suffocating the battlefield with their presence. Lord Voldemort floated at the head of the force, robes snapping in the cold wind like some fallen god, looking down at Hogwarts with contempt. On the open ground before the castle gates, the teachers and students stood ready. Enchanted statues and suits of armor formed a line. The faculty took the front positions, older students clustered behind. Professor McGonagall stood at the forefront, directing the evacuation at the top of her voice. Quickly, follow the prefect's instructions and evacuate through the secret passages at the rear. We won't be able to hold out for long. Voldemort's voice rolled out like thunder, drowning all other sound. Your resistance is meaningless. Look well upon the power I have brought. He raised his arm and pointed toward the writhing black shapes in the sky. The Dementors swarmed out like beasts released from chains, hemming Hogwarts in on all sides. Roger could feel their delight, countless glad emotions for them to devour. The approaching Dementors turned Hogwarts into an airtight cage. Terrified screams rose through the crowd. Some students clung to one another. Others searched wildly for the source of that cold, empty dread. Give up your pointless resistance. No one is a match for me, Voldemort said coldly. I do not wish to harm you. I have always held the teachers and students of Hogwarts in high regard and do not wish to see this place run red with blood. A suffocating quiet fell over the castle. Hand over Roger Lewis, Voldemort added. If you hand him over, you will remain unharmed, and you may be rewarded. My patience is limited. Thousands of eyes turned to Roger. The silence in the Great Hall was almost a thing that could be felt. Standing at the entrance, Roger felt the complicated looks of his classmates, fear, sympathy, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of resentment. Roger. Hannah clutched his sleeve, her voice trembling. Don't be afraid. He patted the back of her hand. Behind him, the members of Hogwarts' legacy had already gathered, led by the Weasley twins and fully equipped with their alchemy rigs. Behind them, most of Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students from second year upward flanked Roger. Ravenclaw hesitated but ultimately stood with them. Only the Slytherins remained motionless. Facing the whole school, Roger felt a rush of feeling but spoke with surprising calm. Professor McGonagall, I want to do my best to hold off Lord Voldemort. Thank you, Roger, McGonagall said decisively. You will handle the defense with me. All other students are to evacuate through the secret passages. Whispers rippled through the hall, some relieved, others fearful. The members of Hogwarts' legacy, however, remained firmly at Roger's side. The professors could not make them leave. Voldemort's voice came again, edge sharpening into anger. Time is up. Since you have chosen to resist, suffer the consequences. The sound of battle erupted from beyond the viaduct as the Death Eaters charged. Spells cut the night, streaking toward the castle gates. Everyone, prepare for battle, McGonagall cried, waving her wand. The stone statues and armor in front of the castle sprang to life, locking into a defensive formation. Professor Flitwick raised a shimmering, high-grade shield charm over the entrance. Countless offensive spells slammed into it, sending up showers of sparks. All students below 5th year, evacuate to the depths of the castle immediately, McGonagall continued. But the assault intensified. Cracks began to spider across Flitwick's shield. The guardians of the castle were being pushed back, nearly exhausted. Above, the Dementors circled, ready to descend. We won't be able to hold out much longer, Snape said grimly. We must find another way. Roger looked from his terrified classmates to the dark mass of the enemy. Professor, I have an idea, he told McGonagall. She urged, What do you want to do? A confident smile touched Roger's mouth. Voldemort thinks he can overwhelm us with numbers. Let's show him what true firepower coverage looks like. He turned to the Weasley twins. Fred, George, are you ready? Ready and waiting, they answered in perfect unison, eyes bright with that mischievous excitement. Good. Roger nodded and looked to Flitwick. On my command, drop the shield. McGonagall's eyes widened in alarm. We absolutely cannot drop it. There are too many Death Eaters out there. Before she could finish, the protective barrier exploded with a thunderous crack. Death Eater's spells slammed into the Great Hall doors. Stone door frames split. Now! Roger shouted. Fire according to our formation. Indiscriminate volleys to the front. At his command, the members of Hogwarts' legacy raised their multicasting wands. More than 20 devices spat out hundreds of spell flashes at once. The Death Eaters had believed themselves secure in superior numbers, and with Dementors overhead, they expected the weak resistance of a few students to be irrelevant. They did not expect a meteor shower of magic. Under Roger's guidance, 200 to 300 spells a second poured forward like a concentrated storm. The multicasting wands had been loaded solidified with a lethal cocktail. Expelliarmus, Petrificus Totalis, Stupefy, the Blasting Curse, Reducto, and more. The torrent hit the Death Eaters before they could react. Many were stunned, then petrified, then blasted into fragments. Others were blown apart before their bodies could stiffen. Some were disarmed into the air and immediately torn to pieces. In moments, the 300-strong army began to unravel. Dozens were reduced to dust in an instant. Many more were torn limb from limb or shattered into debris. What had seemed an overwhelming force could not take another step forward. The Death Eater line disintegrated under that violent, inexorable firepower. 110. There are too many saviors on the viaduct. A horrifying gap had been ripped through the Death Eater's line. Severed limbs and rubble littered the ground, like the aftermath of a battlefield laid waste by an invisible giant. The remaining Death Eaters retreated in panic, unwilling to take another step forward. This was no longer a fight, but a one-sided massacre. Monstrous fury burned in Lord Voldemort's crimson eyes. He could not accept that the army he had spent years building was collapsing because a group of students were using those ridiculous toys. He descended slowly, like death itself, cutting off the fleeing Death Eaters. His snake-like face twisted with rage, and the terrifying pressure he radiated made the Hogwarts students instinctively step back. Whatever courage they had to press on vanished. Roger Lewis. His voice was bone-chillingly cold, carrying across the stunned battlefield. Will you hide behind your classmates like a coward? He swept a contemptuous glance over the students holding the special wands, regarding these alchemical creations with utter disdain. In the power system he believed in, true strength came from the wizard, not from any object. In the next instant, Voldemort flickered like a ghost and crossed dozens of meters in a heartbeat, appearing at the front of the Hogwarts defensive line. He did not look at Roger. He casually pointed his wand at Hermione, who stood closest. I'll start with you, Mudblood. A lethal green light erupted from his wand, faster than anyone could react. Avada Kedavra! Hermione's pupils pinched shut, her mind blanked. But a second before the green light could consume her, someone slammed into her and shoved her aside. It was Roger. He threw his body in front of the killing curse. Something impossible happened. When the green light struck his chest, it did not penetrate. It was as if it had hit an invisible barrier, exploding outward in a sickly green mist and dissipating. Roger staggered but stayed on his feet, face pale. He felt Voldemort had grown stronger. His own death substitution effect had almost been breached. A deathly silence fell. Everyone was frozen. Disbelief was written across the Death Eaters' faces, as if they were seeing their worst nightmare, the all-powerful killing curse, the ultimate expression of magical death, blocked by a wizard's body. What Quirrell had said was true. Soul magic was ineffective against him. Their entire understanding collapsed. Fear and confusion swept through them like disease. If the killing curse was no longer a guaranteed kill, what was left of the Dark Lord's terrifying authority? Voldemort felt his followers' faith faltering. He stared at Roger, killing intent practically coalescing into a visible thing. He understood that Roger had to be ended here and now. Otherwise, the legend of a savior who isn't afraid of the killing curse would crack the foundation of his rule. Good. Very good, he rasped in rage, and a suffocating surge of magic churned around him, more terrible and unfathomable than at the Battle of Angus. Black magical flames soared up and the pressure over Hogwarts dropped. Dumbledore will not return, he intoned, each word frosted with cold. Today this place will be your grave. Before his words faded, he thrust his wand high. Searing fiendfire poured from the tip like a living thing, but instead of spreading wildly, it wove itself into a massive net high above, blotting out the sky and shrouding the open space in front of the castle gates. The fiery wall crashed down and slammed into the ground, forming a shrinking cage of flame that lunged toward Roger, enclosing him. A modified fiendfire. Roger's expression changed. This attack was even faster than before. On the surface of the fire, countless serpents, dragons, and lizards made of fiendfire writhed and roared, hungrily lunging for Roger, intent on consuming him. Roger! Hermione and Hannah cried in unison. Professor McGonagall went deathly pale. She and the other professors threw spell after spell at the wall of fire, but their efforts were like pebbles dropped in the ocean, no effect. Voldemort only sneered, endlessly feeding power into the fiendfire. The cage constricted, the heat warping the air. Everyone watched, helpless, as Roger seemed destined to be burned to ash. At that moment, a figure burst from the crowd with sudden resolve. It was Hannah Abbott. Tear stains still marked her face, but fierce determination burned in her eyes. She raised her multicasting wand and aimed it at the back of Voldemort's heart. He was fully focused on maintaining the spell and utterly unguarded. Die! 5 different colored spell beams, Stupefy, Petrificus Totalis, Expelliarmus, Reducto, and the Blasting Curse, erupted simultaneously. But Voldemort didn't even turn. A faint black magical shield formed automatically. The 5 spells struck it and fizzled with only weak ripples. Foolish, he snorted, not bothering to look her way. Inside the fire cage, Roger watched that futile interference and found something to hold on to. Enduring the blistering heat, he shouted with everything he had left, linked wills. The words rang like a thunderclap, waking the stunned members of Hogwarts Legacy. Double vision spectacles. Fred and George were the first to react, pressing the alchemical glasses onto the bridges of their noses. The Weasley twins, Hannah, Ron, Wayne, Hermione, Seamus, 10 members who had trained together, slipped the military-grade spectacles on almost at once. A faint glow lit the lenses, and invisible mental links snapped into being, pooling each person's will into a single torrent and channeling it into Hannah at the front. Everyone is a savior. Roger's thought echoed in Hannah's mind. The memory of her mother's death, the pain and fear Voldemort had caused, the courage and strength pouring in from her friends, everything surged and fused into a new, overwhelming power. Her expression hardened. No shouting, no hesitation. Hannah raised her wand and poured every ounce of emotion and will into a single act. From the tip of the multicasting wand, there erupted a brilliant, blinding light. Dozens, even hundreds of spells burst forth. Stupefy, Petrificus Totalis, Reducto, each basic spell, already solidified in the wand, it's amplified tenfold by the massed will behind them. A gorgeous, violent torrent of pure spells tore through the air and smashed into Voldemort's protective barrier. Crack! The sound of shattering cut through the night. Voldemort's supposedly indestructible shield broke like glass struck by a hammer. The look of certain victory froze on his face, replaced by shock and horror. He tried to dodge, but it was too late. The torrent struck him squarely in the chest. A shrill, inhuman scream rent the air as he was hurled backward like a kite with its string cut. His body arced and crashed into the stone viaduct with a thunderous impact. The bridge surface smashed into a huge hole, debris flying. Voldemort's form plunged into the abyss, swallowed by the darkness below. The Fiendfire, suddenly unsupported, collapsed and died. The world fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Night wind swept the battlefield, sending dust skittering across the stone. Everyone stood frozen. He fell? Ron managed to stammer. No, impossible! The Master would never. Bellatrix Lestrange screamed and scrambled to the edge. She peered into a deep, dark pit, and her scream turned into a desperate wail. The remaining Death Eaters went pale. Terror etched on every face. Their seemingly invincible lord had been knocked into the abyss by a second-year girl using a toy-like wand? Professor McGonagall's mouth hung open. She leaned against a wall to keep from collapsing. Snape remained in the shadows, his face unnaturally white, a storm behind his dark eyes. Professor Flitwick took off his spectacles and wiped them vigorously, as if he couldn't believe what he'd seen. Hannah stood stunned, looking at her trembling hands and the still warm wand, scarcely able to accept what she had done. She had actually defeated Lord Voldemort. Hermione rushed to Roger's side, anxiously checking him over. In everyone's heart, a tumult roared. Voldemort had been defeated just like that? The prophecy about a savior flashed through their minds. Only, there suddenly seemed to be far too many saviors. 111. The Ministry of Magic's counterattack. The night over London was as black as ink. In an unremarkable terraced house, heavy curtains cut off every stray light and sound, plunging the rooms into a suffocating silence. Joel Shafiq stood like a statue in the shadows by the window, a glass of fire whiskey in his hand. Tall and hard-featured, he was one of Lord Voldemort's most capable confidants. Tonight, he had executed his mission almost perfectly. He and his men had corralled the active forces of the British Ministry of Magic, more than 100 elite Aurors, confining them within the Ministry's fortress-like headquarters and clearing the biggest obstacle to the Dark Lord's plans. Is there still no news, Lord Shafiq? Peter Pettigrew's voice trembled as he wiped his sweating palms together. His small, piggish eyes glittered with a mixture of feverish excitement and ingrained cowardice. Joel sipped the amber whiskey, feeling the burns slide down his throat, and didn't bother to look back. "Patience, Wormtail," he said, his voice low and carrying the weight of unquestioned authority. "Or are you questioning the Master's power?" No, of course not." Pettigrew flinched as if scalded, hastily waving his hands. "I'm just so eager. The thought of the Master crushing Hogwarts and personally capturing that brat Roger, I can hardly contain myself." Outside, at the entrance to the Ministry disguised as a red telephone booth, flashes of blinding light and muffled booms kept breaking the night. Joel's Death Eaters continued to probe and batter at the Ministry's shields, keeping the chaos at precisely the right level. Their purpose was simple: make the Ministry's attention impossible to divide. By all indications, the plan had worked. The British Ministry had mobilized nearly every combat-ready force, but they were trapped behind their wards and battlements, exactly where Voldemort wanted them, leaving Hogwarts exposed to the coming assault. Pettigrew tugged his sleeve anxiously. The dark mark on his fat, flabby arm remained cold and inert, showing no sign of summoning. Of the four men credited for Voldemort's resurrection, the Dark Lord had entrusted Joel and Pettigrew with the crucial task of pinning down Dumbledore and the Ministry. Quirrell had the honor of accompanying the Master to invade Hogwarts personally. Lucius Malfoy, who had been away from the battlefield and kept his face hidden during the Battle of Angus, had only been unmasked to Roger. After the war, Lucius had managed to stay in Fudge's favor, Fudge desperate for allies, and continued to run his newspaper and alchemy workshop, supplying money and public support for Voldemort's rise. Humph. Joel snorted impatiently and stepped to the map-covered table, using the tip of his wand to pry a small gap in the curtains. Dark curses lanced into the sky in sharp white streaks. There won't be any accidents on the Master's side. What threat can a bunch of unweaned students and a few old professors pose? Perhaps at this very moment, the Master is enjoying their deathbed wails. Of course, of course. Pettigrew bobbed and bowed with almost orgiastic enthusiasm. The Master's power is unmatched. Our banner must already be flying over the towers of Hogwarts. Joel grunted in agreement. Since the Battle of Angus, the Master's power had swelled at an alarming rate, bottomless, incomprehensible. He took another sip of whiskey, a look of near-religious reverence on his face. It is true power, born from the source of life itself, not dependent on trinkets. His mind drifted back to the night of Voldemort's ritual. The will of Joel's dead wife had been briefly called back, the tiniest echo of her will, only for a few minutes, but it had been real. Voldemort had promised that, when he ignited the divine fire and ascended to godhood, Joel's wife would be returned to him entirely. A soul summoned back from the beyond, even for a moment, was a terrifying proof that they had reached into the forbidden realms of life and death. Joel, who had spent decades searching for any path to resurrection, believed in that power with a fanatic's certainty. He wanted to watch a mortal climb, step by step, into divinity. Pettigrew rubbed his hands, his face slick with a fawning grin. Yes, Roger Lewis may be skilled, but he's just a slightly stronger bug beside the Master's absolute might. The Master will twist his head off with his own hands and show the magical world who its true sovereign is. Joel moved to the table and pointed at the precise location of Hogwarts on the giant magical map. We've cut off every outside line of contact. The flu network is paralyzed, owls are intercepted, and even those damned mirrors of Erised are shielded. It's an island now. The prey can only wait for the Master's final judgment. When the Master triumphs, Lord Shafiq, you will have your wish, Pettigrew purred. You'll be reunited with your wife. At the thought, his hands rubbed together with greedy anticipation. He snickered, letting his imagination run riot. The minister's robes, the pomp, the groveling of old enemies, endless galleons, a mansion far grander than Malfoy Manor, endless house elves at his command. He grinned with filthy glee until Joel's eyes narrowed in distaste. Then the world itself answered them. A thunderous explosion ripped through the night, louder and more powerful than anything they had heard so far. The house shook violently. Plaster dust and fragments from the chandelier rained down. A Death Eater burst through the door, eyes wide with panic, nearly tripping over the threshold. Lord Shafiq, something's gone wrong. The Aurors have broken out. They're like madmen. Joel frowned. With just those few of them? No, it's not only them, the man panted, voice ragged with terror. There's the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore. Dumbledore himself has come. The color drained from Joel's face in an instant. The glass in his hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Dumbledore? 112. Voldemort is ferocious. The battle in front of Hogwarts was far from over. From beneath the shattered viaduct pier, the faint sound of rolling gravel broke the stunned silence, and then a black shape rose slowly out of the darkness, like the stuff of nightmares, hovering in the air. It was Voldemort. Gone was the studied majesty he once affected. His once luxurious black robes hung in tatters, smoke curling from several ruined seams. His pale, once handsome face was streaked with dust and congealed blood, contorted into something grotesque. To have been blasted into the abyss by a girl he regarded as an aunt, using that ridiculous toy in front of everyone. Humiliation had burned through whatever dignity he still pretended to have and left only blazing fury. His eyes were crimson with a single, terrible want: to reduce everything to ash. The despair that had begun to spread among the Death Eaters flickered out and was replaced by rapturous cheers. On the other side, any relief the defenders had felt evaporated. A cold fear squeezed at their throats and made it hard to breathe. Voldemort ignored the noise, his snake-like gaze fixed on Hannah. He intended to crush this defiance utterly and make terror rule in their hearts again. "You," he hissed, voice like something from the grave, "and your ridiculous toy." Before the last syllable faded, his body dissolved into churning black smoke and reconstituted itself before Hannah in an instant. "Avada Kedavra," he spat. The green light that shot from his withered fingertips was denser than anyone had ever seen, pure, lethal death. Hannah did not flinch. She felt the steady will of her friends inside the alchemical wand clenched in her hand. Holding it aloft, she unleashed everything she had: a torrent of spells. Stupefies red, Petrificus Totalis' grayish white, the transparent shockwaves of blasting curses, woven together into a brilliant, violent cascade that met Voldemort's green light head-on. There was a concussion that rolled across the battlefield. For a heartbeat, the two forces held each other, then both collapsed into a spray of sparks and stardust. Voldemort, however, was not finished. He pointed, and a new spell, black and oily as a poisoned whip, lashed out, an ominous darkness that ate at the light from Hannah's wand. It crushed her spells and shoved them back. For a terrifying instant, the energy seemed to reverse toward the wand itself. The two magics reacted catastrophically. The alchemical wand Roger had poured so much into snapped clean in half with a crystalline crack, detonating into a shower of fragments. The double-vision spectacles on Hannah's nose burst into glittering sparks. The blast struck her like a battering ram. She was hurled away like a kite with its string cut, slamming down more than 10 meters off and coughing up blood. She went limp. With nothing but his own power, Voldemort had annihilated 5 different spells cast simultaneously by the linked wills of 10 people. The professors who watched felt that cold, gutting fact in their bones. "Hannah!" Neville and Hermione shouted, rushing toward her despite everything. The Death Eaters' roar rose like thunder. Professor McGonagall stepped forward to stand between Voldemort and the students, though she was as pale as paper. Flitwick was too stunned to speak. Snape's face was hard and unreadable. Roger felt his heart drop. He had expected Voldemort to be powerful after his resurrection, but not this abyssal, far beyond imagining scale of power. Worse, Voldemort had found a way to counter the alchemical wand almost instantly. The destructive force in that black spell was terrifying. Voldemort turned slowly, savoring their fear. The rictus of rage on his face yielded to a cold, contemptuous smile. "Now," he said, voice rasping, sweeping a blade-like look over McGonagall before scanning the students, "it is your turn." He raised his hand, fingertip poised as if selecting which life to snuff out next. Then, a second torrent of spells struck from the flank, aiming straight for Voldemort's midsection. Harry Potter had appeared with a multi-casting wand, eyes bright with uncompromising fury. "You again!" he cried. Voldemort sneered as if he had expected this. With a flick, a shield materialized before him, dark red, as solid as iron. Harry's full-force barrage slammed into it and shattered into rippling energy, unable to advance an inch. Voldemort stood behind it, amusement and cruelty curling his mouth as he watched the futile struggle. "Now!" Roger shouted, seizing the moment. "Everyone, aim at him. Full coverage." The Weasley twins, Ron, Seamus, and every member of Hogwarts' legacy, still able to fight, raised their alchemical wands. Over 20 thick, brilliant torrents converged on Voldemort from all directions. For the first time, the expression on his face faltered. He could not hold against every angle at once. Abandoning his suppression of Harry, he dodged desperately to the side. The spells missed him, but they did not vanish. Most slammed into the weathered viaduct pier behind him. The castle shook, stones screamed. In an instant, the pier disintegrated into powder. The bridge overhead, its support lost, groaned, and then tore itself apart, crashing into the abyss with a roar as stone and dust rained down. The viaduct that had tied Hogwarts to the outside world was severed. For the first time, a flicker of true alarm crossed Voldemort's face. Those kids, those toys, wielded power that could threaten him. He would not give them another chance. He looked up into the dark sky, a tumult of despair and fear roiling overhead, and raised his hand. A silent command, sharp as a knife, reached into the clouds. Hiss! From the heavens, hundreds of dementors answered like vultures called to a feast. They swooped not in slow circles, but in a single black waterfall, diving toward the grassy clearing before the castle, toward every living thing. Their keening cut through the air like cold itself. McGonagall's face set in grim resolve. All students, follow the prefects and evacuate. All staff, stay behind. Roger, did you hear me? You must leave too. 113. Listen to my instructions. Lord Voldemort's patience had finally snapped. He spoke no more. He only raised his wand, a cold, absolute gesture that signaled an all-out assault. For the Master! Bellatrix shrieked and led the charge. The remaining Death Eaters poured forward like water breaking a dam, launching a last desperate counterattack. Hold the gates. Buy time for the students. Professor McGonagall's voice cut sharp with urgency. The evacuation inside the castle was not yet complete. Every second mattered. She had long since set aside any thought of her own safety. Severus, she called into the shadows. The Dementors are yours. Keep them back. Filius, Rubus, take the others and intercept the Death Eaters. She tightened her grip on her wand, eyes fixed on the terrifying figure hovering in midair. If she could only delay him for a moment, she would face Lord Voldemort herself. She was about to rush forward when a firm hand pressed on her shoulder. Roger. Professor, this won't do. Let go, Mr. Lewis. McGonagall tried to shrug him off, her voice taut. Now is not the time for theatrics. Your transfiguration is unmatched, Professor, but it's best used against the cannon fodder, Roger said briskly. Professor Snape can't hold that many Dementors on his own. And Lord Voldemort, he glanced at Harry. There is someone who can deal with him. McGonagall froze. Roger left no room for argument, barking orders now. Professor Snape, take the threats in the sky with me. Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, organize the defense and intercept the Death Eaters. Neville, Ron, and the others help them. And Harry. Harry Potter answered without hesitation. His palms were slick as he gripped his multicasting wand, but his eyes held no retreat. Lord Voldemort is mine. Hold him off. You're being ridiculous, McGonagall snapped, unable to keep it in. How could Harry possibly be a match? Snape, you are not. Snape cut across her with a look that needed no words. He drew his wand and with a blur, dissolved into a cloud of black smoke and shot into the sky, his movement a clear ascent. Harry nodded to Roger and squared his shoulders toward Voldemort. Flitwick and Sprout exchanged a quick glance and began marshalling the remaining professors and older students into a defensive line. In an instant, the field began to operate with the efficiency of a planned student deployment. McGonagall stood frozen, the absurdity of it all lodged in her chest. Worried and unwilling to accept it, she raised her wand to step forward and support Harry. After a single step, the scene before her seared itself into her memory. Lord Voldemort hovered, his wand whipping out lethal spells that cut toward Harry like venomous snakes. And Harry, still, to McGonagall, a child who should be sheltered, moved with an astonishing combat instinct. He rolled clumsily at times, dove sharply at others, narrowly avoiding each attack. Green light scorched the tips of his hair, dark curses exploded into craters at his feet. For a long, tense stretch, Voldemort could not land a single hit. Stand still, you little insect, Voldemort snarled, fury flaring. Each escape felt like an affront. He surged upward and pointed his wand straight down at Harry. Avada Kedavra! The dazzling green light struck Harry square in the chest. I hit him! Harry Potter is dead! Voldemort shrieked with twisted triumph. The hearts on Hogwarts' side fell into their mouths. McGonagall's vision went black. She nearly collapsed. And then the impossible happened. The green light struck what seemed like an invisible barrier on Harry, ricocheted, and reversed direction with even greater speed. Voldemort's ecstasy vanished, replaced by sheer terror. Instinctively, he cut his flight short and dropped from the sky, face slamming into the ground. The reflected green light grazed the hem of his robes and streaked into the forbidden forest, leaving a swath of dead silence behind it. Voldemort lay on the ground, sweat chilling his robes, panting in shocked recognition. 13 years ago came back to him. He understood in an instant. He stared at Harry, unharmed, having merely stumbled before regaining his stance. Those crimson eyes blazing with malice. The blood protection. It made it impossible for him to personally kill Harry Potter. For a beat, the entire battlefield froze. The Death Eater's fanatic faces wavered. Had their invincible master been forced to roll on the ground by his own killing curse? The rumor from 13 years ago echoed back. The savior couldn't be touched by the killing curse? McGonagall stopped, heart pounding. She looked from Harry to Roger, hovering in the sky against the Dementors, and felt an absurd thought bubble up. There were a lot of people who could take Voldemort. Harry, Roger, even Hannah had almost done it. What was happening to this world? High above, the wind howled. Snape's black smoke had regained a stable form. Facing the Dementors like a man against a dark cloud, his face was a hard, unreadable mask. He raised his wand, forcing whatever scraps of joy he could summon into a single last effort. Expecto Patronum. A silver doe leapt from his wand and raced toward the swarm. Wherever it went, Dementors shrieked and broke ranks. Snape pushed himself to sustain the Patronus, breath ragged, but he could only carve out a small safe zone in front of the castle gates. There were simply too many Dementors. Hundreds, no thousands, bypassed that small ring and surged like a black tide toward the students below. It's over. We can't stop them, Snape thought, alarm seizing him. He turned, preparing to warn those underneath, and saw Roger floating behind him. The boy wore a gold-trimmed black cloak that billowed in the night wind, holding him steady in the air. Snape had seen that alchemical cloak in the Battle of Angus. It was powerful, magical, and Roger seemed perfectly at ease in it. Facing the stragglers that had slipped past the Patronus, Roger raised his wand almost casually. Ava Minor Soul-Locking Chain Curse. A slender green beam shot out and struck a Dementor dead on. The creature gave a short, strangled wail and convulsed. The green light did not dissipate. It arced like a chain, leaping to a second, then a third, a fourth. The Dementors, linked by the light, howled together as smoke poured from beneath their cloaks, as if some corrosive force devoured them. The weakest turned to ash on the spot. The stronger were grievously burned and scattered, unwilling to come near again. Roger waved his wand with unhurried precision, weaving green chains of lightning into a net in the sky. Each spell tore through 3 to 5 Dementors at once. Snape had exhausted himself to clear a handful. Roger cleared the stragglers in a few calm, efficient motions. Snape let the Patronus fade beside him and watched, expression shifting. What kind of spell was that? It carried echoes of the killing curse, but was different, efficient, exact, lethal. He looked at the boy practicing in the air and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the knowledge he took pride in might already be out of date. Perhaps even Lord Voldemort was beginning to show his age. The battle fell into a strange, wary stalemate. Far below, away from the clangor by the Black Lake, a deep, watery silence wrapped the depths. Bioluminescent plants shimmered like distant stars. A giant octopus coiled by a boulder on the lakebed, its great tentacles twitching now and then. Before it, a shadow drifted, indistinct in the gloom, as though merged with the darkness itself. "Godric," the shadow said suddenly, its voice an ancient vibration through the water. "The children above are fighting for their lives. Don't you want to go up and help?" "I haven't arrived yet." The interrogation room under the Ministry of Magic was cold and damp, the air heavy with the bitter tang of blood and the sickly sweet nausea of Veritaserum. Joel had escaped, but Dumbledore had a Death Eater prisoner. The man was slumped in an iron chair, eyes glassy, saliva leaking from his mouth as the potion made him confess mechanically. Dumbledore stood to one side and listened. When the last syllable left the Death Eater's numb lips, the faint, soft light that had lived in his blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles winked out. Voldemort's true target was not the Ministry or Diagon Alley. It was Hogwarts. More precisely, it was Roger Lewis, who was at the castle. A blade of anxiety passed through Dumbledore. He knew the castle's defenses better than anyone. 100 stone sentinels were nothing against more than 300 ravenous Death Eaters and their dark creatures. Among the professors left to defend Hogwarts, only Minerva, Filius, and Severus could be trusted to hold their own. They might slow the tide, but they had no hope against Voldemort himself, who had returned to the field with his army. Dumbledore produced the ancient double-vision spectacles and murmured, "Minerva?" The mirror's surface stayed flat, as still as a tomb. Dumbledore's brow tightened. He turned to Kingsley Shacklebolt, head of the Auror office. "Contact Hogwarts by any means. Flu, portkeys, every channel." Kingsley went and returned quickly, his face grave. "Senior Undersecretary, every magical connection to Hogwarts has been forcibly severed. The Department of Magical Transportation reports interference. I fear there is a mole." A mole. The truth sank into Dumbledore like cold venom. Voldemort had spun a web for this assault, not merely to take the castle, but to cut off all aid. Cornelius Fudge burst into the room, disheveled and breathless, surrounded by Aurors. His bowler hat sat crooked on his head, and his pinstriped green robes were rumpled. He looked as shaken as he sounded. "What's happening? Albus, tell me, what happened? A traitor among us?" Dumbledore's voice was unusually even. "With the help of an insider, Voldemort has used a diversion. His main force is laying siege to Hogwarts." Fudge went ashen, his mouth trembling. "A traitor? Besieging Hogwarts? How dare he? How many children are in that school? What do we do? I will lead 100 elite Aurors to reinforce them at once." Dumbledore turned to Kingsley. "Gather your men. I will apparate directly to Hogsmeade and lead them." "No." Fudge's protest was a shriek, panic turning his voice thin. "You cannot leave, Albus." Dumbledore looked at him slowly and calmly. The look chilled Fudge. Instinct kicked in, and he rallied. "This is clearly a lure to draw our best forces away," he said, puffing himself up. "If you take all the elite Aurors, what if the Dark Lord's real target is the Ministry? And who can guarantee there isn't another traitor among the remaining Aurors?" A glance of wariness flickered through Dumbledore's eyes. "Cornelius, Hogwarts is under siege by over 300 Death Eaters, and Voldemort is on the field himself." Fudge paled further. Dumbledore restrained his impatience and offered another plan. "Very well. Assemble all senior ministry officials and the remaining Aurors. We will fly by enchanted cars and broomsticks to provide aerial support." "Are you mad?" Fudge jumped back as if burned. "Fly to the Scottish Highlands? Do you think you know who will be hosting tea? We'd be sitting ducks, picked off one by one." Silence fell. The Aurors around them, hardened and seasoned, looked on with thinly veiled contempt. Dumbledore inhaled and kept his composure. "Then you and I, and 100 elite Aurors, will apparate together under my lead. The rest will stay to guard the Ministry. That should put your mind at ease." "Only 100? Fudge's eyes widened, as if hearing a cruel joke. "There are 300 of them, plus the Dark Lord himself. We can't throw in so few. It's suicide. I will not risk my life and those of my subordinates on such a pointless gamble." Kingsley closed his eyes slowly, unable to watch the floundering defense any longer. Dumbledore smiled then, but it was not warm. It smoothed his face and left a hard, cold edge. "Very well, Cornelius. Since you are so far-sighted, please tell us what we should do instead." Fudge became flustered. He cleared his throat, adjusted his hat and tie, eyes skittering to the floor. "Ahem. We must not act rashly. Safety first. We should assemble all our strength. Then take the flying cars, more stable, and the Aurors on broomsticks to guard the perimeter. We set out from London and advance steadily, preserve our forces, and catch them by surprise." He finished and looked around for approval. He found none. Every face held a measure of contempt so plain it stung. Drive from London to the Highlands? By the time such a convoy arrived, Hogwarts would likely be ashes. Dumbledore's smile disappeared. He scarcely spared Fudge another glance. "Kingsley, Dawlish, Tonks, Williamson," he called, naming a dozen of the finest Aurors. "Gather every willing fighter. Come with me." Ignoring Fudge's frantic protests, he strode for the exit. Those summoned, and many who were not followed without hesitation, their boots rang through the marble halls, a determined tide. "Target, Hogsmeade Village. Apparate." Dumbledore's voice rang like a bell through the Ministry. "Wait, where are you going?" Fudge chased them a few steps, panic overtaking officialdom. "Dumbledore, I order you to stop. This is insubordination. Treason." No one looked back. The figures blurred as they assembled their magic and vanished one after another. Fudge stood helpless as his most formidable force evaporated. In an instant, the corridor was left with him and a few elderly or disabled staff members Dumbledore had intentionally left behind. Cold wind swept through the open doors. Fudge shivered. He looked at the small cluster around him, then imagined the Death Eaters outside the ministry, and the traitor still hidden within. Fear like an icy hand closed around him. The fragile sense of safety he had been clinging to collapsed. "What about me?" he screamed, panic sharpening his voice into a near hysterical keening. He stumbled after them, arms flailing. "Take me with you. I haven't arrived yet. Take me. Dumbledore, take me with you." 115. What happened? Hogsmeade. The dizziness from the last twist in the spatial distortion had barely faded when the figures of more than 100 wizards suddenly materialized on the cold, empty street. A night wind carrying the bite of early spring shoved against them. As soon as Dumbledore steadied himself, his gaze flew to Hogwarts. One look, after a century of experience, after seeing more horrors than most, his heart sank. Above the castle hung a thick, inky darkness, like a huge swath of filthy velvet crudely smothering the stars and swallowing the moon. These were no ordinary storm clouds. They writhed with a terrible life, a mass of dementors condensed into a single crawling thing, exuding a cold and despair that made the soul recoil. From the direction of the castle came waves of raw magical energy, intense fluctuations that washed over the village like invisible ripples and made even the battle-hardened Aurors clench their chests. This power, Kingsley Shacklebolt fell into step beside Dumbledore, voice low. "It's stronger than what we felt at Angus." Lord Voldemort had grown more dangerous. The truth slammed into them all. Whatever had been happening, it had just taken a darker turn. Hogsmeade itself had gone deathly quiet. Doors and windows locked, lights dark. Only a few trembling faces peered from behind curtains. When they recognized Dumbledore and the Aurors, a handful of doors opened cautiously. Aberforth, hair wild and beard awry, barreling out of the Hog's head with his wand gripped like a club, was the first to rush forward. "Finally," he barked, voice rough. "Half an hour ago, those blasted things came down from the sky. The Flu network's been cut. The owls can't get out. We're cut off completely." Dumbledore felt the last ember of hope die. Voldemort's plan was far more thorough than he had feared. This was not merely a siege, it was a total isolation of Hogwarts, an effort to turn the school into an island cut off from every possible aid. There was every indication that the Dark Lord intended to annihilate reinforcements before they could intervene. He did not hesitate. Waving the Aurors to follow, Dumbledore strode toward the Black Lake. The closer he drew, the more a gnawing anxiety ate at him. It all traced back to a prophecy, a vague, overlooked prediction Sybil Trelawney had made during an interview long ago. At the time, none of them had taken it seriously, least of all Dumbledore. But Voldemort had been painstakingly turning that prophecy into reality. Only Dumbledore knew its full content, and he knew its most terrifying feature, its self-fulfilling nature. The Dark Lord's attempts to eliminate the threat only pushed events toward the prophecy's outcome, shaping Harry Potter into the supposed savior. Fate had appeared to run along a fixed course, until Roger Lewis appeared. The boy was like a pebble thrown into a still lake. The ripples he created disrupted the whole pattern. The battle at Angus had been the first sign. Now Voldemort had bypassed the Ministry and come straight to Hogwarts, clearly targeting Roger. The pointer of the prophecy had shifted from Harry to Roger. If Voldemort killed Roger, the shackle of prophecy might break. Freed from that constraint, Voldemort's path would be unpredictable and far darker than anyone could foresee. He could not allow that to happen. Others might fall. Roger must survive. The shortest route back to the castle lay across the lake. Dumbledore reached the shore, raised the Elder Wand, and began to marshal a mass of cold that would freeze a path of solid ice across the water. But the moment before the spell burst forth, he stopped. A throb deep in his soul made his hair lift. The sensation did not come from Voldemort or the castle. It came from beneath his feet, from the black, bottomless water of the lake. At the lakebed, it felt as if two ancient, indifferent eyes were opening. One presence was vast and solemn, like the silence of an ocean abyss. The other was even older, something primordial and law-like. Their power dwarfed any magical creature he knew, and for the first time Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of the age, felt a fleeting shiver of his own smallness. Voldemort, 300 Death Eaters, 1,000 Dementors, a traitor deep in the Ministry, and now two nameless, terrible things waking at the bottom of the Hogwarts lake. He had lived 100 years and never felt so exhausted. "Detour," Dumbledore ordered, voice cutting, through the forbidden forest. They could not risk an encounter with whatever lay beneath the water. The company changed course, slipping into the shadowed edge of the forest and racing along the shoreline toward the castle. When they burst through the last line of trees and onto the great lawn, everyone came to an involuntary halt, stunned by what met them. There were no blazing duels, no screams, no corpses strewn across the grass, only an oppressive, unnatural silence. And in the middle of it, Lord Voldemort lay sprawled in the mud, a pathetic figure. His reconstructed, arrogant face was streaked with grass and dirt, his red, snake-like eyes flicked between two boys, one standing on the ground near him and the other hovering in the air, malice coiling in them. Harry Potter stood opposite him. He was a little unsteady, breath coming fast, but otherwise unharmed. Above them, Roger fought in mid-air among the Dementors, darting and striking. Every so often, a jinx from Roger snapped at Voldemort. The Dark Lord had been hit several times but could not break Harry's defenses. Behind the ruined span of a collapsed overpass, the Death Eaters had been forced backward by a barrage of spells from the younger defenders. They had expected their master to turn the tide. Instead, they stood frozen, wands gripped, fanaticism drained away, faces blank with confusion. Their leader's magic was failing to settle the battle. Voldemort was struggling with a child? Worse, two children. The other boy in the air made an even stranger picture. Cloaked in black trimmed with gold, he floated serene, wand in hand. Thin green shafts of light leapt from its tip like snaking lightning, weaving through the great winged creatures. Each flash sent several Dementors keening and collapsing into ash. Occasionally, he sent a jinx skittering at the earth that made Voldemort howl when it struck. He did it all with the air of someone enjoying effortless target practice, not fighting a duel that would decide countless lives. Dumbledore looked from the panting, enraged Voldemort to the composed, elegant figure of Roger above, then to the unharmed Harry. For the first time in ages, a blankness passed over his crystal blue eyes, an emptiness the Death Eaters themselves now wore. Everything he had expected, everything he had feared, seemed to have shifted into something he did not yet understand. The silence behind Dumbledore lasted less than 3 seconds. Kingsley Shacklebolt was the first to recover. Without a word, he raised his hand, and over 100 elite aurors fanned out behind him, wands trained in unison on the equally stunned Death Eaters. Spells lit up the lawn like daylight. The long-awaited reinforcements had finally arrived. The sudden show of force pulled Voldemort out of the quagmire of humiliation. He rose slowly, gave his robes a silent scourgify to brush off dirt and grass, as if that could erase the memory of his fall, and still he did not look at Dumbledore. His crimson, serpent-like eyes fixed on Harry, malice brimmed so full it seemed about to boil over. "You think it's over like this, Potter?" His voice hissed, threaded with a kind of repressed madness. "You think that filthy blood will shield you forever?" Harry gripped his wand, ready. He did not know how long whatever protection he enjoyed would last, but retreat was not an option. "It seems you aren't that powerful," he panted, forcing his voice steady. "It seems you can't do anything to me." The taunt, bitter and true, made a muscle twitch in Voldemort's cheek. He had to shift his gaze from Harry. His mind cooled. The two greatest wizards of the age met each other's look, and the pressure between them thickened the air like syrup. "Albus," Voldemort said, regaining a slim veneer of civility, poisoned civility, "you always like to make an appearance at the last moment. Unfortunately for tonight's script, you are not the protagonist." Dumbledore said nothing, only scanned the battlefield. When his eyes fell on a figure clearing Dementors from the sky with chains of green lightning, an inscrutable light passed through the blue eyes behind his spectacles. He understood Voldemort's intent completely. "Stop this, Tom." Dumbledore's voice was as gentle as ever and just as unyielding. "Hogwarts is not a place for your insolence. I said, you are not the protagonist." Voldemort shrieked, but his target was not Dumbledore or Harry. It was Roger, high in the air. A curse, thicker and more dazzling than any before, a bolt of purple thunder, ripped through the night toward him. Voldemort had seen through Roger's substitute soul charm. It was only a facsimile, not invulnerable. When soul magic mixed with spells that harmed the physical body, the disguise could not hold. This compounded killing curse gave him confidence enough to try to kill Roger. Everyone felt the extraordinary ferocity of that curse. Hearts leapt. Snape's face drained of color, and he nearly lunged forward. Dumbledore raised his wand to intercept, but Roger was faster. Expecting a surprise attack, his gold-trimmed black cloak billowed, the patterns along its surface seeming to come alive and shimmer. He slid through the air with a movement so fluid it seemed feather-light. The killing curse skimmed the edge of his cloak, and instead struck several Dementors further off. Those creatures had no time to wail before they were annihilated in the purple light. Voldemort did not pause. He launched himself from the ground like a bolt of black lightning, abandoning Harry, ignoring Dumbledore, raining down wrath on this youth who had so often thwarted him. "I will drag you from the sky and crush your bones one by one." A breathtaking chase began. Voldemort melted into smoke and rematerialized in afterimages, lethal curses spitting from his hand as if they were nothing. Roger relied on his enchanted cloak, twisting and turning. Each dodge was hair's breadth from disaster, yet always perfectly timed. He moved like a matador playing the bull, provoking Voldemort and escaping just before the horns reached him. "Don't just watch, support him," Professor McGonagall barked. She ordered the staff to fire impediment jinxes and disarming charms into the sky to hinder Voldemort. Most of those spells were deflected by the invisible barrier of dark magic around him and had no effect. On the ground, Aurors and Death Eaters were fully engaged. Kingsley and Dawlish cut through the Death Eaters' ranks like twin blades, their spells precise and deadly, felling several in moments. The Death Eaters' morale, already shaky from their master's predicament, crumbled against the Ministry's elite. Only Bellatrix Lestrange fought like a woman possessed, screaming, "Sacrifice yourselves for the Master! Cowards, do not retreat!" Her wand flung sheets of dark magic, and a few careless Aurors were wounded. "Your opponent is me, Bella." A low voice came from behind. Bellatrix spun and found Neville Longbottom staring at her with a determination that wiped away his boyish features. Beside him stood Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and others. Their multi-casting wands flared together. "Little brats, seeking death," Bellatrix sneered, then tried to laugh, but the multi-casting worked perfectly in a group. Whenever one spell reached her, it was met by a barrage of 5 or 6 different counterspells. Her face contorted, she began to scream and falter, thrown into chaos. Quirrell watched the whole thing from behind a giant rock, palms sweating on his wand. He saw Voldemort toyed with in the sky, his comrades pressed back by Aurors and students, and his fear gnawed at him. Power lived in him, but courage did not. When a Death Eater beside him took a stunning spell and slumped, Quirrell shrank back, edging toward the battlefield's margin. At that moment, Dumbledore moved. He ignored the chase and the skirmish. His target had always been only one. "Tom, your opponent is me." The words were quiet, but they cut through the tumult. Voldemort's pursuit stalled. He turned slowly, his crimson eyes burning like twin coals. "Very well." He hovered, madness and fury warping his face. "Albus, come at me together. Tonight, here, before your beloved school, let us have our reckoning." Green light lanced from his wand. Dumbledore gave a light flick. The damaged gargoyle statue before the castle shuddered to life, folding out massive stone wings to shield the tower. Voldemort's killing curse struck it, and the gargoyle exploded into a rain of stone. Dumbledore flicked again, and those flying fragments coalesced into dozens of snarling stonehounds that leapt at Voldemort from all sides. Voldemort snorted, traced an elegant arc with his arm, and a torrent of fire burst from his hand, forming a giant serpent that swallowed the hounds. The fire serpent reared and lunged at Dumbledore, a blistering wave of heat bearing down. Dumbledore's expression never changed. He pointed the Elder Wand. The waters of the Black Lake seemed to answer. A thick column of water tore from the lake and met the fire serpent in midair. Water and flame collided with a sizzling roar. Steam billowed up, swallowing half the battlefield and blurring everything within it. For a time, Hogwarts became a private stage for the two legends. They called upon earth, water, air. Elements rose and groaned as their magics clashed. Roger used the distraction to descend beside Harry and McGonagall. "Professor, organize the students in Aurors. Don't let the Death Eaters escape." he said in a rush. Harry, come with me. To where? Harry asked. To find a good vantage point, Roger smiled, and dragged Harry toward the astronomy tower on the castle's flank. Quirrell, still crouched behind his rock, read Dumbledore and Voldemort locked in mortal combat and decided this was the moment to vanish. As he bent to apparate, the ground beneath him thudded, once, twice, then again in steady, heavy beats. Something enormous was moving up from the deep, each step a thunderous thump. That dull vibration came from the depths of the Black Lake. At first, it was only a distant sound, like drums echoing far away, but in an instant it swelled into a terrible roar, growing nearer and louder. Hogwarts itself trembled. The ancient stone walls groaned. Dust fell as if the castle were complaining under some irresistible pressure. On the battlefield, everyone froze, turning toward the inky surface of the lake with alarm. Even the cloud of spray that hovered above, stirred up by the duel between Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort, was torn apart by the motion, revealing the two great wizards, both paused, both startled. Merlin's beard, what's that? Ron braced himself against a broken pillar, bewildered. Is it an earthquake? Hermione guessed, then shook her head. No, it's not right. This vibration, it's alive. The lake no longer lay calm. A monstrous whirlpool formed at its center, greedily swallowing water and roaring. Then, to the horror of every eye, a huge, grotesque tentacle burst from the abyssal swirl, thick, slimed, lined with massive suckers. It was larger than the castle's towers. With a devastating primeval force, it slammed into the lakeshore. The impact cracked the bedrock with a guttural thunder. Soil and rubble flew like shot. This was not an attack on any one person. It was an impatient warning from something ancient. It's the giant squid, someone screamed, voice breaking. But this was not the gentle creature the students knew, the one that occasionally let them stroke its tentacles on sunny afternoons. It radiated a terrifying, primeval aura. The exposed portion of tentacle showed muscles bulging with a power that felt capable of toppling cities. Quiet. A voice, not carried by air but sinking directly into their minds, cut through everyone's thoughts. Ancient, deep, and resonant, it had the quality of something older than speech, like the very voice of the land. As it spoke, a figure rose from the whirlpool. He had an elderly, almost simian face and a thin, long beard that almost reached the hem of robes that looked as if they had been carved from stone. He floated beside the monstrous tentacle, and those present felt the indifference of a majestic, unconquerable presence watching them. Who is that? Voldemort's face changed. He sensed that the power emanating from the man and the squid was a kind of magic he had never encountered, primitive and majestic, almost like the laws of the world made visible. Dumbledore's expression darkened as well. As Hogwarts headmaster, he knew many old legends. Some said the giant squid of the Black Lake was the animagus form of Godric Gryffindor. But 1,000 years had passed. It had seemed tame for generations, often coming to the shallows in warm weather for students to play with. There had been no signs of an ancient wizard, and nothing to suggest it would assume humanoid form now. The figure beside the squid carried a terrifying aura and strange magical fluctuations, and he did not match the portraits of Godric Gryffindor Dumbledore had seen. Dumbledore remembered the two exceptionally powerful presences he had sensed earlier by the lake. It appeared they had arrived, but who were they, and why now? Noisy, little things. The ancient voice returned in everyone's heads, colder, clearly displeased. Your games disturb us. Everyone stood stunned. The Death Eaters exchanged looks. The fanaticism and bloodlust on their faces were replaced by a primitive fear. The Aurors gripped their wands, nervous and uncertain before these unknown giants. In Voldemort's red eyes, however, a flicker of greed and appetite for conquest sprang to life. To him, any power in the world should be bent to his will. Great being, he called in a carefully cultivated, honeyed tone that spread magically across the battlefield. I am Lord Voldemort, the most powerful wizard of this age. I will reshape the order of the world. Submit to me and share in that supreme glory. At once, the giant tentacle lashed out. It moved with astonishing speed. Voldemort's face tightened. He apparated aside just in time. The tentacle barely brushed his robes, the wind from it slicing the air with a sonic shriek where he had stood. Order? The figure seemed to laugh without sound, his shape flickering. Your lives and deaths, what do they mean to us? Your honor is laughable. Presumptuous, Voldemort snapped, enraged by the contempt. He threw up his hand and spat the command. Crucio! A blinding red light shot toward the shadowed figure, but the surface of that shadow barely stirred. The curse struck like a pebble cast into the sea, no ripple, swallowed and silenced. Voldemort's pupils narrowed. The Cruciatus was a dark spell that affected the mind and soul. For it to be so easily nullified unnerved him. Uninteresting. Tricks, the figure said casually. Up on the astronomy tower, Roger and Harry leaned over the cold railing, watching the scene below. Who is he? Harry asked, stunned. Roger produced a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and tossed one to Harry. No idea. If I'm right, he's not quite a living man yet. He's in the process of being resurrected. Harry popped the bean into his mouth and was immediately assaulted by an earwax flavor. He stifled a gag. You can even tell that? Of course. Roger chewed contentedly. He'd drawn a strawberry bean. Right now, no one understands resurrection better than I do. Harry went silent for a moment, then hoped aloud, So are they, here to help us? Don't know. Roger shrugged. Back at the shore, Voldemort did not relent. Sinister magical power swelled around him as he began chanting archaic words, dark runes forming in the air. But the figure in the lake seemed to have reached the end of his patience. Enough. The voice carried the weight of final judgment. Instantly, the black lake seemed to come alive. Its waters boiled. From its depths, thick chains of water condensed, as if the wrath of a sea god had taken shape, and they surged up and over the shore, blotting out sky and land. This was not wand work or precise spellcraft. It was raw, violent natural power, like a disaster made manifest. The Death Eaters' ranks collapsed. They fired spells in panic, but the weak lights were swallowed by the rising floods. More than 30 of them were tangled in the water chains and dragged into the bottomless dark of the lake, disappearing without a trace. Dozens of Aurors were swept away as well. The survivors fled in terror, retreating from the shoreline and hastily throwing up defensive wards that barely held against the indiscriminate onslaught. Voldemort's unfinished incantations were ripped from him by the deluge. He had to pull back swiftly to avoid being dragged under. He looked down at his army, decimated in an instant, and for the first time an expression of raw horror and rage flickered across his handsome, distorted face. His meticulously planned assault on Hogwarts, meant to be decisive, had already been thwarted in a series of humiliations, first by an unkillable boy, then by a flying loach, then by Dumbledore himself, and now by two monstrous presences rising from the lakebed. A sense of absurdity and frustration boiled up in him like a new kind of fury. Professor Quirrell, clinging like a terrified sloth to a thick surviving tree trunk, looked every inch the wreck. Icy water had soaked through his robes and clung to his skin. The night wind made him shiver uncontrollably. He watched helplessly as colleagues were swept away by the churning black lake, then looked up at his master on high, Voldemort's face ashen, taut with frustration. Survival finally won out over fear and his crumbling loyalties. Without another pause, he activated Apparition. With a soft crack, he vanished from the nightmare battlefield. His flight was the first falling domino. When Voldemort's closest assistant fled, the remaining Death Eaters lost what little will to fight remained. Apparition cracked one after another as the surviving Death Eaters scrambled to vanish, afraid they might be a step too late. In moments, only a handful of diehards lingered where the Death Eaters had made their stand. Voldemort himself hung alone in midair, a commander with no army. Then, amid a low, inhuman buzzing laugh that carried endless mockery, the enormous dark shadow and the terrifying giant squid sank slowly into the black lake. The surface closed over them as if they had never been there. What remained was a ruined battlefield and a ring of shaken wizards staring at one another in disbelief. Then, from an angle none of them expected, a blinding white light tore through the night sky from the astronomy tower. The source of that light was peculiar. While solidifying the protection around Harry's soul, Roger had quietly planted a will seed. Now he drew on Harry's resolute will, Harry, the savior of prophecy, to cast a spell that had almost no conventional flight path. Its trajectory transcended ordinary magic. To Voldemort, it registered less like an attack and more like the inevitable fulfillment of a prophecy. The instant the light issued from the tower, Voldemort's body stiffened, and he collapsed out of the sky. The battlefield fell into an eerie silence. Everyone's eyes widened, mouths hanging open, flicking between the astronomy tower and the dark figure on the ground in disbelief. Dumbledore, however, would not convince himself that Voldemort could be undone so easily. He knew the path Voldemort had walked. Destroying him might not be as difficult as destroying a Horcrux, but it was not something a single spell should simply resolve. He stared sharply at the place where Voldemort had fallen and stepped forward. "Master!" Bellatrix Lestrange screamed, a high, deranged cry. She barreled toward where her master lay, frantic and furious. "We haven't lost. I can still fight. Kill them! Kill them all!" She brandished her wand, utterly unhinged. The other Death Eaters who remained were pale and conflicted, unable to believe their Dark Lord had been felled so inexplicably, so absurdly. In that instant, Voldemort's body twitched. He snapped his crimson eyes open, with unbelievable speed seized Bellatrix's wand, and still lying on the ground, gave a violent flick. Crack! A flash of thick black light, a thunderous report, and Voldemort and the last few loyal Death Eaters on the field vanished. With their departure, the oppressive shadow that had hung over Hogwarts finally lifted. When taut nerves relaxed, exhaustion and an almost physical hollowness of survival flooded the defenders. A few young Aurors felt their legs give out and sank onto the muddy ground. "It's over?" someone murmured. We won?" Another voice rose, trembling, then resolving into certainty. "Yes, we won." Despite the baffling turns, the result was victory. Hogwarts had held. Professor McGonagall sighed, the sound of relief that followed hours of strain. She pulled herself together and began directing professors and prefects to count survivors, tend the wounded, and comfort frightened students. Snape, grim-faced, walked among the subdued and unconscious Death Eaters. He roughly rolled up sleeves and inspected each dark mark. His eyes narrowed as if confirming some important fact. Dumbledore cast a meaningful glance toward the astronomy tower and then to Kingsley Shacklebolt, steady and composed. "Kingsley, I'll leave this to you. Take these prisoners back to the Ministry for strict interrogation." His voice was steady, but he lowered it a touch. "And regarding tonight, especially those two guests in the lake, I hope the Ministry's official report can offer a sufficiently stable explanation." "I understand, Albus," Kingsley nodded. He knew certain things beyond common sense would only cause unnecessary panic if made public. A noisy roar approached then, like a tractor choking for breath. Everyone turned in surprise as a dozen black Ford Anglias, Ministry issue, wobbled over the forbidden forest and hurtled into Crashland, scattered across the ruined lawn. Doors burst open, and Minister Cornelius Fudge tumbled out of the lead car, hat long gone, pinstriped robes smeared with mud, leaves, and bird droppings, his face as pale as flour. Is the battle over?" he panted, leaning on the car door, visibly terrified. The senior Ministry officials who climbed out looked little better. They stared at the scene, terrible and ravaged as if frozen. Kingsley stepped forward and said flatly, "Minister, you have arrived in time to assist with escorting these prisoners to the Ministry." Fudge's eyes flicked over the bound Death Eaters, and then to the apparently unharmed Dumbledore and the exhausted Aurors in command. His expression slid from terror to extreme embarrassment, and then he forced on a clumsy, bureaucratic air of authority. "Ahem, I knew it. I knew you would turn the tide, Dumbledore." He brushed dust from his robes, trying to reclaim ministerial dignity. "I personally led the Ministry's elite forces through the night to provide support to ensure the final victory. My strategic deployment was perfectly timed." Aurors nearby exchanged undisguised looks of contempt. Drive from London to the Scottish Highlands? By the time the reinforcements arrived, they were hardly in a position to help. Only because the battle ended so bizarrely quickly would they have anything to boast about. Dumbledore merely tilted his head and smiled at the minister with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through facades. He said nothing. The smile alone made Fudge feel worse than any sharp rebuke could have. Dumbledore turned and walked back toward the castle. There were more pressing matters to attend to. On the astronomy tower, the wind bit with an unusual cold. Harry, still reeling from the astonishing and surreal events, watched as Roger leaned casually against the cold stone railing, whistling softly. Prophecy, Roger thought, was a marvel. Watching the battle between Harry and Voldemort through the vision fed to Roger's biocomputer had been revealing. Both their lines of magic were deeply rooted in the surrounding space, like two blades of grass planted in the same soil, with strange connections running beneath the surface. That was the truth of prophecy. Intriguingly, much of that connection had been carved by Voldemort himself, his magical threads plunged into the surrounding space. "The two of you performed far beyond expectations tonight," Dumbledore said gently as he came up the tower steps. Harry and Roger turned to see the old headmaster approaching with a smile. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry straightened. "Just a bit of luck," Roger replied with a shrug and casual tone. Dumbledore joined them at the railing and looked out over the dark shape of the Forbidden Forest and the quiet, starry sky. Too much had happened. Voldemort's assault, the giant creature in the lake, and that powerful dark wizard of uncertain allegiance. He felt that established destinies had been disturbed and were stretching into unknown directions. He was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly, curiosity more than accusation in his voice. "Roger, that spell you used at the end against Voldemort, it was very unusual. I don't believe I have seen it recorded anywhere." "Oh, that," Roger said lightly, as if discussing the weather. "That wasn't an ordinary spell, it was part of the prophecy." The word prophecy slipped from Roger's lips as casually as someone commenting on the weather. To Dumbledore, though, it hit like a storm. Prophecy was the most profound, most evasive discipline in the wizarding world. Seers spent their lives catching only blurred ripples on the banks of the River of Fate. They revered and interpreted it. No one ever spoke of harnessing it. Yet the young man before him was calmly discussing how to use it, as if it were a tool he handled every day. Roger's tone was as offhand as a craftsman mentioning a familiar instrument. Dumbledore had lived more than a century and seen brilliant wizards like stars streak across the sky, men like Gellert Grindelwald, whose ideals had once matched his. Even the greatest among them pushed magic to its limits within the known rules. Roger, however, seemed to be inventing new rules. Dumbledore's usual blue eyes, always alight with strategy and humor, were now only blank, stunned. What precisely was the will seed? How did he weave spells together with fate itself? And that resurrection magic, countless questions that could overturn the wizarding world's understanding collided in his mind. Looking at Roger's oddly calm face under the moonlight, Dumbledore understood something else. He had spent his life strategizing, moving pieces on a board, treating others, even himself, as pawns toward a greater goal, trading necessary sacrifices for final victory. But Roger Lewis, and whatever ancient terrible things lay in the depths of the lake, were not pawns. You cannot steer a tsunami. You cannot bargain with an incoming meteor. The more Dumbledore thought, the less certain he felt he could guide this force. At last, the questions dissolved into a long sigh that melted into the cold Highland wind. "Lord Voldemort." "Tom, he's noticed you," Dumbledore said, his tone steadying into the concern of an elder. "Because of you, the needle of prophecy has shifted," he added. "A significant portion of the fate that was once centered on Harry has wrapped itself around you. In some ways, your situation is more dangerous than Harry's." Harry's heart tightened, and he instinctively glanced at Roger. "I know," Roger replied, almost icily calm. He idly raised a finger and traced a line in the air, as if plucking at invisible threads of fate. "He wants to take me out, and I want to take him out. Our objectives line up, cuts down on tests and scouting. It's convenient." The bluntness, tinged with grim humor, stopped every caution Dumbledore had prepared about lying low, shoring up defenses, and planning a long game. Harry wanted to shout, "That's Lord Voldemort," but Roger's expression made the alarm feel absurd. Dumbledore looked at Roger and suddenly laughed, not with plotting gleam, but with a weary relief, as if a heavy burden had been laid down. He realized he was not facing another brilliant boy in need of guidance. He was facing an equal, perhaps something beyond him in a certain way. The darkness he had spent his life fighting might be, for this young man, merely a problem to be dealt with. "The future's in your hands, then," Dumbledore said finally. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone handing over a torch. He patted both boys on the shoulder, gentle and meaningful, and turned to descend the spiral staircase of the astronomy tower. The night wind lifted his silver robes. From Harry's viewpoint, The old man's back looked older by several years, yet his posture was as straight as ever. What does he mean? Harry asked himself, watching Dumbledore round the stairwell. What does "it's left to you" mean? He's Dumbledore. It means, Roger said, stretching with a series of crisp pops in his joints, the old man is burnt out. He sees a capable intern and wants to retire early, dump the mess on us. It's a kind of workplace PUA. Don't take it seriously. Harry blinked at the unfamiliar term. PUA? I'll explain later. Roger waved him off. Come on, Harry. Back to bed. Madame Pomfrey's going to be busier tomorrow than King's Cross Station. We need to get there early if we want a good spot. They left the tower. Harry followed Roger, who walked as if they'd just finished a dull class, while Harry's mind replayed the night's chaos. Voldemort struck from the sky by a bright light and fleeing. Dumbledore rare and almost helpless. Two terrible beasts rising from the Black Lake and crushing the Death Eaters. The Minister of Magic arriving with Aurors in that ridiculous flying car. It felt as if the wizarding world Harry had known for 2 years had leapt into something stranger and more thrilling, and at the center of it all was the humming youth beside him. Roger, humming a tuneless ditty, frowned slightly, as if mulling over some weighty matter. "What are you thinking about?" Harry asked. "Still Lord Voldemort?" Roger came back to himself and gave a serious look. "I'm thinking whether pumpkin pasties will be cancelled tomorrow because of tonight." Harry stared. "Huh?" "If they are," Roger said, eyes grave as if facing a decision of cosmic import, "do I go for the bacon pie or try the famed steak and kidney pie?" "This is a serious question, Harry. It affects my morale and my combat effectiveness for the entire day." Harry was speechless and fell into step behind him. The corridor was a mess. House elves frantically repairing scorched walls, older students clearing rubble and puddles with practiced spells. The air smelled of dust, potions, and a faint tang of blood. Everything reminded him of the battle they'd just lived through. Yet Roger's stride was light. He even whistled as they passed a portrait whose frame had been half burned, the painted fruit inside shivering as if terrified. A ridiculous thought struck Harry. Perhaps, in Roger's view, Lord Voldemort and tomorrow's breakfast pie truly occupied the same rung on the importance ladder, both deserving serious consideration. Wizards are those who can make their wishes come true. On the morning of the second day at Hogwarts, there was no trace of post-victory jubilation, nor the usual anxiety of final exams. The air smelled of dust, damp stone, and a faint tang of potions. Scorched spell marks and hastily healed magical wounds marred the corridor walls like unhealed scars. House elves moved silently, using magic to clear the remnants of the previous night, but no cleaning charm could lift the heavy weight that still hung over the castle. In the Great Hall, students sat in small, listless groups, pushing breakfast around their plates without tasting it. Many faces were still pale with shock, and conversations were kept deliberately low, as though afraid of waking nightmares that hadn't yet left them. Roger, however, was an anomaly. He was utterly absorbed in the mountain of breakfast before him. Bacon, fried eggs, sausages, eating with a slow, peculiar concentration, as if performing a ritual. "What a pity," he said, neatly cutting a piece of sausage and dangling it on his fork in front of Harry. "The pumpkin pasties will be ruined. I can sense the house elf's sadness in the kitchen. Emotion affects the yeast and upsets the sweet and sour balance of the filling. War is truly gastronomy's worst enemy." Harry didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The absurdity of last night pressed in again. "Roger, we almost died last night. People were hurt, and some were dragged into the Black Lake. We don't even know if they're alive." "I know," Roger said, popping the sausage into his mouth and chewing with contentment. "That doesn't contradict my desire for a decent breakfast. You need something to look forward to, and mine is simple, a perfect breakfast." A flurry of hurried footsteps and suppressed gasps came from the Great Hall entrance. Cornelius Fudge swept in, flanked by ministry officials and a gaggle of reporters. He'd changed into a new dark green velvet robe and polished bowler hat, his face composed into a practiced expression of sorrow and resolve, as if the panic of the previous night had been someone else's hallucination. A reporter scribbled frantically with a quick quotes quill, eager for copy. "Students, professors," Fudge called, striding to the center of the hall and spreading his arms theatrically. I, your Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, an ancient magical passage leading to Hogwarts, was subject to evil interference by he who must not be named, and we have therefore been forced to adopt a more cautious posture. But rest assured, our hearts are with Hogwarts. His words were met with awkward silence and a few perfunctory claps from his entourage. Some older students, especially those with ministry relatives, wore open scorn. Fudge didn't seem to notice. He cleared his throat and continued. Fortunately, under the leadership of Albus Dumbledore, whom I dispatched, and through the valiant efforts of our aurors, we successfully repelled the attack. This is a great victory. His gaze landed on the Gryffindor table. Of course, he added, as if remembering, several courageous students distinguished themselves. Mr. Harry Potter. Harry felt frozen, like prey in a hunter's sights. And Mr. Roger Lewis. Fudge's eyes lingered on Roger with an odd expression. He had clearly heard the bewildering reports, especially the mysterious spell from the astronomy tower that had apparently repelled Lord Voldemort in a single stroke. The Ministry of Magic will not fail to honor its heroes. I have therefore decided to award both of you the Order of Merlin, 3rd class. This will be the fastest conferment in the Ministry's history. A ripple of restrained excitement ran through the hall. The Order of Merlin was a rare honor, but Harry felt only awkwardness at being spotlighted. Roger didn't even look up. He was scrutinizing the texture of the last sausage on his plate with a fork as if studying a rune. Mr. Lewis? Fudge prompted, a little off-kilter at the lack of response. Roger finally looked up, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and said calmly, Minister, you can keep the medal. I don't like trinkets on my robes. His voice carried across the quiet hall. If you truly want to reward me, use your ministerial authority to have the kitchen start making pumpkin pasties again. I want puff pastry, extra cinnamon, and less sugar. Ron choked on his pumpkin juice. Hermione made a frantic, embarrassed movement to stop Roger, but it was too late. A stunned silence fell, then snickers broke out from dark corners. Even Professor McGonagall's lips twitched. Fudge's face flushed purple. The solemnity he'd worked so hard to manufacture was ruined by a pastry request. He felt like a well-dressed clown whose trousers had been yanked down. Insolence, snapped a senior assistant beside him. How dare you speak to the minister like that? Roger didn't look at the man. His gaze rested on Fudge with calm, clinical scrutiny, as if the boy were examining an intriguing specimen. Insolence? He repeated. My attitude is sincere. A medal means nothing to me. A good breakfast makes me happy. I think asking for something that brings real, tangible joy is more honest than accepting a showy ceremonial reward. Don't you agree, Minister? Fudge was left without a ready answer. The boy's gaze made him feel less like the minister and more like an object of study, and that stung worse than the fear of the previous night. He forced a smile, brittle with anger. Ha! Mr. Lewis is amusing. We shall discuss conferment later. He snapped the topic shut and adopted a sterner tone. However, last night's events exposed grave security failures that have accumulated since Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw founded this school. A dark force managed to lurk undetected in the Black Lake, the school's core area, for far too long. This is gross negligence and a disgrace to the safety of our students. He spoke with self-righteous zeal. Harry's heart sank. He could see Fudge's real aim emerging. Therefore, I hereby announce. Fudge unfurled a parchment scroll and held it aloft, voice booming, that under Article 3 of the Wartime Emergency Education Resource Allocation and Safety Supervision Act, the Ministry will comprehensively evaluate and overhaul Hogwarts security measures and will begin to closely monitor and register certain unregistered, potentially dangerous magical abilities. At that moment, with a tiny pop, a house elf appeared beside Roger. It wore a starched, faded pillowcase and carried a silver platter holding a golden-brown, flaky pumpkin pasty, the warm scent of cinnamon rising from it. Young Master Lewis, the elf squeaked, eyes shining with adoration. The kitchen, its companions heard your wish. This was baked specially for you from the last of our Halloween pumpkins with a little grateful magic. We hope you enjoy it. Roger bit into the pasty and closed his eyes in satisfaction, then winked at the elf. Tell them thank you. It's perfect. Fudge, suddenly without a stage left to command, looked ridiculous, his fiery denunciations deflated by the simple fact of a boy eating a pasty. Chewing quietly, Roger murmured to Harry. See, Harry? Sometimes solving problems is simple. You just have to tell the world what you want. A wish fulfilled, that's probably the best thing about being a wizard.